we're not in tune with the sort of infinite learning that is possible when you're fully open. And I experienced this complete openness on ayahuasca once, and it made me realize, like, I remember looking at like water dripping from a leaf, and I was absorbing information I couldn't comprehend. And then when I would have a thought about that, every thought I had, I was learning from the previous thought. And I was like, I had that thought because I'm like this. And the reason I'm like this is because I think of things like this. And the reason I'm even having this is because I'm looking at this. And this is, and it was just like the same world that you always see. A bit like how, with a person, it's the same person you always see.
Yeah.
And you think that you're seeing everything, and you're fucking not, man.
Ciaran O'Loughlin, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Of course. So we were talking about perceived boundaries that go along with cancel culture right before we started recording surrounding podcasts and stand-up comedy, those sorts of things. And I thought an interesting place to start would be something that you posted about recently on Instagram on your music account, Oloff. And you reacted to this thing that happened where climate protesters threw a can of soup on Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers painting to protest fossil fuels. So I'm not sure what was going through the minds of these climate change protesters that connected that to fossil fuels. But you wrote that Van Gogh expressed himself by creating things that people love, and these people express themselves by destroying things that people love. So I wanted to ask you, where do you think that this type of destructive expression comes from?
I think to some extent it's just something people are capable of. It's something that's in people. But I think a lot of it comes from universities as well. Seems clear that a lot of people come out of university kind of somewhat indoctrinated. It depends what type of degree you study, obviously, but there does seem to be a lot of ideological indoctrination that goes on there. I think some of the professors are people who were either peripheral figures or active parts of kind of the Cultural Revolution or Civil Rights Movement, or maybe they were a little bit after that and wanted to be more a part of it than they were, and they kind of project that onto today and onto their students. There's been a kind of one-upping, I think, as well, from both sides of the sort of social kind of political spectrum, because I don't think it's really political anymore, is it? It's like it's a whole sort of divide between people. And I think also it's it's just people lashing out, really. It's people kind of exercising some form of power, and it's quite a cheap, easily available form of power, right? To go and like do something destructive like that. It's kind of it makes people feel like they're something, or they're doing something, or they have some kind of impact on the world. And I think sometimes it's a way of lashing out about their own personal lives, their personal failings, or negative emotions that they have.
Yeah, it seems like the lashing out, and especially the one-upping, is part of it. Because I watched the video after I saw your post, and just the way that they got ready for it, like they're pumping themselves up. It's like you could tell that there are other things that were involved in their psyche at that moment besides climate change. Like they were almost competing with the last climate change protest instead of trying to do something that would draw attention to climate change and actually change people's behaviors, which is, it's counterintuitive to the whole notion of why someone would want to protest in the first place. Because if you get someone's attention, that can be a form of protest, but it won't necessarily lead to a change in people's behaviors that see it. So you'd want to get people's attention in a way that's going to sort of cultivate this sense of, oh, what I'm doing is fucked up, or what I'm doing is, maybe there's another way of thinking or another way of behavior that these people seem so impassioned about and are pointing out wrongs in society, like in the civil rights movement that was much needed. And when you see something like two college students that really haven't, you know, I don't want to speak for them, but I know certainly at my age, when I was 19, 20 years old, I'm 28 now, so I'm still dumb in a lot of ways. But especially at that age, I was so fucking clueless. And when you see people like that, just like dump a can of soup on one of the greatest, you know, most looked up to works of art ever created, and then they kind of just like sit back and they're like, yeah. You're like, in my mind, I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? Like, how do they think this is actually going to change something other than pissing people off and being even more emboldened against climate change? Because they're just going to be like, fuck these people. Like, I was going to start recycling, and now I'm going to just order single packages on Amazon just because I want to spite these bitches who toss soup cans on Van Gogh's paintings.
Yeah, it does have that effect. And you see it with Greta Thunberg as well. Like, adults don't like being told what to do by children, and that really puts people's backs up. And also, yeah, what you said, I mean, about how it's not effective. Like, you see the same thing, I guess, in a lot of the culture war stuff going on, a lot of the stuff surrounding racism or just race in general. Most of the time you think, okay, if these people were level-headed and they were really trying to make society less racist and more comfortable for people of every race to kind of interact with each other, this isn't what they would do. Like, this isn't how they would engage. They wouldn't keep creating these kind of negative, circular, kind of unpleasant conversations filled with vitriol. Like, and then you start to think probably they aren't really focused on the greater good. Whether or not they realize it, they're just focused on obtaining some kind of role for themselves in society, and their brain doesn't really go there. Their brain doesn't really go to, like, what is this actually doing in the world? As long as they can create some kind of sentence or statement that justifies it, and it gives them some kind of role, then they're kind of happy to do it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a really questioning person, I guess you think you're forced to reckon with that, right? Like you've been into psychedelics and stuff, right? And you know, like, there's times where it really makes you think, like, what am I actually doing? Like, what effect am I having? And, like, how am I affecting the world? Some people, I think, are just not there, and they could be, but they're not. And so
I've never actually done a full dose of psychedelics. Some people consider MDMA a psychedelic, so if you do consider it that, then I have, but I've only actually microdosed mushrooms, and other than that, I haven't tried psychedelics. But I have spoken to many people who have, which probably gives me, you know, a 0.1% glance into what it's actually like, but I've never actually tried it myself in a full capacity.
Right. Well, yeah, and similarly with MDMA, it can force you to reckon with things, and I mean, but even without substances, I think it's like, I don't know. I think some of those people, they are capable of it, they just aren't doing it. But when you see them, you look at the images of them and you see the videos of them, they don't look, to be honest, like very functional, happy people. You see a lot of sort of physical, it's kind of sadness or depression almost in them. It's just, they kind of just reek of it a bit, and reek of people who are not operating at a very high level chemically as well. And you see that a lot in these people, to be honest, who engage in these kind of provocative behaviors and stuff. They very rarely seem like people who anybody would want to be. I think that's part of the problem, is they don't really want to be those people. And in the situation like this Van Gogh thing, there seems to be a good bit of jealousy, not necessarily towards
Van Gogh specifically, but it seems like a lot of these activists want to be artists, and their activism is an art in its own way. There's a craft to championing a cause and then getting people to pay attention. There's a whole creativity that goes along with that. So on a deep level, I wouldn't be surprised if the girls who did this, or, you know, however they identify, you have no fucking idea these days. Oh wait, one of my alarms is going off in the background. I must not have turned it off. I'm gonna go grab that. Sorry about that. The alarm that I started using, I have to do squats to turn it off, and so I just had to do 20 squats right there, which is why it took so long.
What, is it an app or?
It's an app called Alarmy. I was using just the normal iPhone alarm before, and I had the alarm play Petite Biscuit, Sunset Lover by Petite Biscuit, and I just started enjoying it too much to the point where I wasn't actually getting up. I was just letting the song play, and the regular alarm wasn't getting me up. I would sleep through that sometimes. So this somehow manipulates the iPhone sound system in ways that I've never heard a sound as annoying as this alarm. And it's so jarring to wake up at, and then it senses the motion. You have to keep your thumbs printed on it, and you can set it to do a task when you get up. So do squats or take a picture of the bathroom mirror, and then it turns off.
Wow. So just from your thumbs, it knows you're doing squats?
Yeah, I've tried to turn it off in bed before, and it's very hard to hold on to it. It's somehow that there's a gyration thing in the iPhone where it can tell if you're going up and down, and somehow the app taps into that.
Wow, that's amazing.
But yeah, that's why it took so long.
No problem.
But yeah, to go back to the Van Gogh thing, I was saying there seems to be a bit of jealousy involved, because I do believe that if a lot of activists had the choice, they would want to be seen as artists instead of activists. And it says a lot that the thing that these girls chose to take down is a painting. And they may not be jealous against Van Gogh specifically, but there's a reason, either consciously or subconsciously, why they chose something public like a painting, and, you know, not just a well-known building or some sort of place to do it in public, like desecrate, I don't know, like something else that people don't see as artistically, but they chose a Van Gogh painting and just tossed fucking tomato soup all over it. And there's probably something inside them that feels that this is an art piece of its own, what they just did, like performance art in a way, not just a protest. So maybe there's something there where they just want to be creative, they want to be seen as artists, and they haven't been given the guidance to really express that in a positive way. And it could be the college campus, the culture that you were mentioning at the beginning, just not a lot of positive influence on how to be a creative person and do it in a way that is, you know, going to be fulfilling and induce positive behavioral changes in yourself and other people, if activism is the path that you ultimately want to take, or maybe you just want to be creative. But there does seem to be a deep-rooted jealousy in this whole act that they committed.
Yeah, and it was nice of them to choose something that millions of people enjoy and are inspired by, and that generally costs nothing. Like, you can go and see his paintings, and it was so, yeah, a lot of when I made that post, a lot of people would come at me and say, oh, so you care more about a painting than the earth? And I thought, well, A, those are not mutually exclusive. You can care about both. It's quite easy. And B, like, yeah, it's not really just a painting, is it? It's like a cultural meeting point for people's minds, and it's a thing that a lot of people care about, and it doesn't matter if you like it or not. A lot of people do, like so many people. And so many people have brought their kids to see it. so many people have like fond memories of visiting it, and it's just horrible to feel like some of the few things that we do actually share that aren't politicized or aren't kind of poisoned are things like that. You know, like there's no barrier to entry, there's no political component, there's no exclusion. It's just something that people are completely free to enjoy. So it's a particularly cowardly target, I think. On what you were saying, you remind me when you're talking about the performance art thing and what they did. Have you ever heard of the group the KLF?
No.
They were a musical act from, I guess, like the 80s and 90s, and they got really big really quickly. They had a few singles that were really big, and then they became kind of disillusioned with the music industry, I guess. They wrote quite a sort of funny satirical book about how to, and kind of more like a pamphlet about how to succeed in music, and it's quite scathing. And they, at some point, they took all the money they had left, roughly, which was about £1 million, and they withdrew all of it from the bank in cash, and they burned it. And
wow.
This was basically all of their money. They were broke afterwards, and they did it as an artistic statement, as a gesture. They never fully explained why, and they still don't really talk about it much. They talked about it a couple of times, but they never really were able to, or never wanted to, give the full story. And it's quite intense. I mean, really is quite... On the one hand, you know, there are moral arguments against it, and I totally understand those. But it's hard not to respect it on some level, because it's such a huge sacrifice, you know, to make. Like for all the good they could have done with it, of course, like probably they would have just spent it on themselves anyway. And on some level, it seemed they never quite got over it. A guy who was there, I think he was one of their managers or their friends or something, he said that afterwards they just both had a look of like complete dismay, and they had kind of psyched themselves up to do this thing, much like those protesters, you know, they psyched themselves up to do it. And by the end, they were just, they weren't sure if they really knew why they did it, you know?
Yeah, £1 million fucking pounds. Like, I couldn't imagine. I've heard artists that write songs about it, even directly. There's a song by Black Bear. I forget the title of the song, but he says a line, "Take my money out the ATM and start a little bonfire." But I've never actually heard of someone doing that. So just withdrawing, like, I'm trying to imagine the feeling of taking out everything I have, which is way less than £1 million, and just watching it burn and not feeling the need to jump into the flames and kind of fan out the dollars that I had left just immediately after setting the fire. Like, that's, you know, other than the Joker, there's not many people that can do that and feel good about it. Like, this is the right decision. Just watching it burn away and be like, yeah, this is, yeah, I don't know. Like, did they write about it after that in the book? Did the book come out after they burned all the money, or?
I think the book was before. It was, no, and it was completely unrelated. They did a couple of TV interviews, but generally it was older, more traditional TV hosts kind of berating them for what they did and for how it was wrong, and they kind of didn't. The interviews I saw, they never really got into it fully. There was a documentary about them recently called "Who Killed the KLF," but that was more, again, about their music, or at least it didn't really clear anything up. It didn't clear much up. It's one, you know, there's some statements I guess you can make artistically that, like, they can be read in a number of ways, but the fact is they will be read in some way, and that is where the power comes from, right? Like, I mean, do you ever, you know, have that feeling, for example, if you're like near a cliff or something and you're like, oh, I could just jump off the cliff, and you sort of feel like, oh, that's weird. There's some part of me almost wants to, not because I'm suicidal, but because it's just like someone saying, don't press that button, and you want to like press the button, you know? And like,
yeah.
Do you ever have that feeling with things in your life where you're like, if I just told this person to fuck off, or if I just like if I just smashed up my computer, or if I could do that and I would still be alive. I could sort of destroy, you know, I could, you could go on YouTube, right? You could delete your whole thing. You could just do it, and you would still be alive. And there's a subjectivity to it, because like essentially inside you, everything could still be the same, and you could still feel calm and peace and be like, yeah, it's fine. And I don't know, in between the external reality of you doing that and then how you feel about it, there's something else, I guess, that maybe they were accessing that's like interesting, but I don't know if it's that interesting that it's worth burning £1 million. I don't know, but it's something, I guess, like maybe it's good that someone has done it, you know, just so that we all have this reference point.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was like a drug for them. Maybe they were getting rid of things of much lesser value before that, and they kind of wanted a bigger rush. Like maybe one day it started out with them all just smashing their iPhones, and they're like, what if we just all threw our phones in the ocean right now, or just fucking took a hammer and beat the shit out of an iPhone? We could just go get another one. It's not going to be that bad. And then they're like, what if we just fucking like drove our cars off a cliff and then got out and just like all smashed our cars and just didn't have, and they just like started destroying all their possessions. And then the hit just wasn't big enough to the point where they couldn't take out all their money. And you like that was the next step. So who knows how long they were actually doing things like that. Maybe burning £1 million is the first time they ever tried to explore that feeling. But it could have been that they were doing it with other shit before, and they kind of, because it is freeing in a way to like lose something. I've never lost anything, you know, that financially substantial, but I've just, you know, lost things like things that are worth $1,000, like a phone, or losing podcasts that you've backed up, and just kind of sitting there like, I can't get this back if I wanted to, and this means a lot to me, whether it's financial value or creative value. And then there's this freeing moment after punching holes through your wall where you're just like, I always have myself. I can always start over. Worst comes to worst, I am a person with creative faculties who can start from scratch. And if 300 people were listening to me before, they're still going to be listening to me when I start the next podcast. They just won't have the backlog. So I've thought about things like that. Like, what would happen if I just lost every podcast, like YouTube taken down, RSS feed just disappeared the next day? That would suck, but you'd still have your audience and you could still record future episodes.
Yeah, but when you're making art, it's different as well, isn't it? Because there's a part of me that feels like, as a person, I don't care what happens to me really that much, but I care because I feel like I'm invested in something outside of me. So when you're trying to create things, it's not for you, it's for other people. And that, for me, is where a lot of conflict comes in my life, because I think like I can quite easily, I think, just kind of get all zen about shit and be like, whether I'm a fucking pauper or I'm a king, like, really doesn't matter that much, because it's all in my mind, and I can, as long as I'm okay and I'm alive and I'm healthy, I can pretty much enjoy anything and be happy in any situation. But the difficulty comes when you're trying to achieve something, right? Like, because then, like, if your podcast did get deleted, it'd be like, well, I was doing something good for the world and other people were enjoying that, and fine, I can get over it maybe and feel fine, but I'm actually trying to achieve something bigger. And I think that is quite difficult. To me, it's like the gift and the curse of making things. Your life doesn't belong to you. It sort of belongs to, for me, it's almost like religious, but like it belongs to whatever is giving you these ideas in the first place, and to the world. that can create quite a lot of problems for you yourself, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of parallels to how I think in that sense creatively, but I also have a different sense about it where the podcast or the story that I'm writing at the moment is my life, and if someone destroyed an unfinished work of art, that would, or like quote unquote art, like podcasts is more of a craft. I don't really consider it art, but it's like something like writing a story. If someone destroyed something that I'd been working on before I got a chance to release it, I would feel much more like someone had attacked me, or I was, under some sort of physical, mental duress. If someone had just lit a story on fire and I didn't have anything backed up and I hadn't released it yet. But once I release it, maybe this is bad. Like it doesn't affect me as much. It's like if someone, because it's like theirs now. I don't view it as mine anymore. It's like if someone else wanted to delete my podcast that had already been released to the world, it would suck, but it would kind of be like me watching a bunch of other people light their own shit on fire. Whereas if someone destroyed like the 6 episodes that I have in my backlog, I think that would hurt me more in a way. It's hard to tell unless it actually happens how I would react if I had 2 individual experiences, like destroyed everything I had before I put it out and then everything after. But in a way, I feel like it's other people's lives once I release the work. And then when I'm still working on something, it's more a personal infliction upon me.
Because you want the satisfaction of finishing it. Yeah. I worry about it a lot with music because I always, I worry about it disappearing, whether that's just through time or just lack of notice or being destroyed in some way. I always worry about it. But then, and you see it with people, I think about like people building stuff like the Taj Mahal to like, it's like to feel like you're still here after you die. Like people go to such lengths to and I don't know exactly what that, I guess it's different for everybody, but it's like a combination of, you want some feeling of permanence, which is impossible. You want some feeling of having an impact on the world. You want some feeling of being here after you die. That is permanence. But yeah, but I mean, it's like whatever happens, even if you're like Elvis, right? And you have like such a huge impact, there'll come a time when Elvis, neither in people's memories or in form of data or anything, most probably there will come a time where Elvis does not exist in any way, shape or form, whether it's in a thought or in a piece of data. I mean, maybe not. Maybe we're headed for some infinite like digital future or whatever, where everything will be uploaded. But most probably, according to like sort of common sense, like probably his music isn't permanent, and he is as big as you could ever be. That doesn't mean that it's as good as nothing just because it's not permanent, but it's hard sometimes to grapple with that concept. I think like you can't be infinite. You can be a lot closer to infinite than a normal person, but relative to infinity, it's nothing. And then you just get into weird kind of like swirly concepts that are impossible for a human to understand, I think, or like really conceptualize.
Yeah, what's that saying in Hollywood that you die twice, and the first time is when you actually die, and then the second time is the last time someone says your name? So yeah, it's like, I suppose there will be a time when someone says Elvis or listens to an Elvis song for the last time. But then there's also the elements of Elvis's music that sneak into other people's creativity and musical creations, just like other people before him snuck into his music. So in a way, even if your name isn't associated with it, you're creativity is living on in a sense, as long as it's influencing, even if it's, 0.0001%. Maybe someone listened to a podcast or listened to a song and subconsciously it affected the way they create, and then that affects the way other people create. So it's kind of this, chain, like it almost feels like a separate Big Bang in a way, like the physical Big Bang and the creative Big Bang, like all these fucking creations just like keep expanding and expanding and mashing into each other. And then that makes something new. And then, new planets form, new ideas form, new works of art. And then that's just going to keep going on for however long the universe goes on. So yeah, I don't know. The concept of permanence starts to feel like a mind fuck if you keep following it down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as long as there is music and history, I think he will be remembered. But I think those two things you're describing, the sort of physical reality and then the creative, like the impact he has on the universe, I think those mix as well. Like he's had like a physical impact on the universe just through, as you said, the influence he has on people and the influence people have on their environment and the influence their environment has on the universe as a whole. So like whatever happens, yeah, he even if human beings all just crumble to dust or whatever, he still has had an impact. I do think as long as we have music, as long as we're around, I think he'll be remembered. But I guess I can't imagine us always being around. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, when you look now, it's like hard to. All of our assumptions, or so many of our assumptions about the future or about our society and stuff, are kind of starting to disappear a bit. I think I've noticed over the last few years, people are opening their minds up to things they never would have considered before. Like if you mentioned simulation theory 20 years ago, it was a bit silly. It was just kind of like, oh, that's a wacky idea. But now a lot of people feel quite deeply that that is true. And it can be explained logically. And a lot of stuff like that. I mean, it's a bit the same with how a lot of stuff conspiracy theorists used to talk about. It's now like kind of accepted as fact. Whereas it used to be, these used to be like fringe ideas.
Yeah. I guess everything before it becomes a mainstream idea has to enter into our consciousness on the fringe somehow. It has to find a way in. And then once it finds a way in, it's competing against other mainstream ideas. So there's going to be an initial backlash to whatever, the conspiracy theory is, whether it's the Earth revolving around the sun or simulation theory, which I don't know enough about. I think about it sometimes while I'm meditating, and I'll just kind of look off into space and it'll hit me that maybe this is all a projection of something and this isn't actually here. And then I start thinking about, well, how would that actually affect the way that I walk through life? If someone gave me 100% hard proof evidence that we were in a simulation, that we were just kind of brains in vats somewhere else and living this complex, colorful, emotional projection, would that actually change the way that I behave? And I don't know if it would, because I'm still going to affect my simulation. Like, I don't know how to get out of it. So that's something I think about too. I should definitely look more into simulation theory so I can think about it in a better way and talk about it in a better way. But I do, because of people that have made these ideas more mainstream, like Elon Musk tweets about it a lot. I listen to Lex Friedman on his podcast. He has more than a few people talk about simulation theory. So it is a fascinating and frightening concept.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really know that we are in one or not, because according to I guess to everything we understand now, you can't really know anything, because even if somehow the universe communicated to you this like truth, that, oh, you were in a simulation, well, that truth is still seemingly liable to change at any moment, and how do you know that it's the truth? And as of now, everyone you interact with, like, I mean, you don't know that I'm real, right? You have no way of knowing. There is no way of knowing that I'm actually conscious. So I think, in a way, the thing I just have to hope for is that we genuinely just don't understand anything, because according to everything in our kind of current understanding, when you think things through, it's quite like a bleak picture, to be honest. When you think about the universe and the nature of existence and consciousness, it's hard to tell yourself a positive story. The most positive one really is this sort of Richard Dawkins kind of explanation of the universe, you know, and of everything. That is the best case scenario, I think, according to our current model. So for me, I just pray that, like, we are literally, like, you know, the way like a dog looks at a computer and has no idea what's really going on. I really hope that is the case for us, because there's no other logical positive scenario you can really conjure up in my mind. It's something that came up a lot when I was tripping, and it really disturbed me for a while. And now I just thought, there's no fucking point thinking about it, really. It's a waste of time, and I have to try and have, like, faith in the universe or whatever's beyond that, because otherwise you can almost go through everything in your head mentally and go, no, it's not that. If it is that, it's bad. This might be true. If so, how could I know? And you can kind of exhaust everything and exhaust yourself thinking like that. So I've just given up on it now, and I think, like, I hope I'm just a fucking idiot, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm an idiot, and I guess in a way I hope I am too, because I want the future, whatever we are, the future projections of people or actual people, you know, who the fuck knows, to have so much more of a grasp on what's actually going on in reality. And maybe they're able to pierce the veil where you can go back and forth between the simulation and what other world lies behind the simulation. And they'll just look back on us like we kind of look back on early humans. Like, you know, what the fuck were they doing? They were just kind of playing with sticks and making fire. And we're just, like, you know, playing with iPhones, fucking driving in cars, and people in the future are, you know, teleporting, visiting other realities, you know, emotional telepathy, shit like that. So yeah, it's I think about it while meditating. I suppose if I did take psychedelics, that would also spark some sort of rabbit hole drag, like just like an intense reflection on it too. So when you've taken psychedelics and this feeling or this notion of what is this reality, what is it made up of, comes up for you during a trip, is it typically a positive journey? Is it you know, do you find yourself wanting to avoid those thoughts during a trip? How does that usually go for you?
It happened, I guess, a few times. I think it happened and I didn't really know. Maybe it was just a kind of vague idea. And I think that is pretty much the battle that we all face, kind of existentially, whether we realize it or not. I think that's, like, where a lot of religious belief comes from, and then where a lot of people's problems come from in the absence of religion, is innately deep down you sort of know certain things that are disturbing, and you don't really confront them, A, because you just don't have the idea to confront them, and B, maybe because it's very painful and there's really no benefit to confronting them. But I feel there are things we all know that are very disturbing is not a strong enough word. I don't know. I mean, I had one trip, really, it was only one. It was a very, very bad trip, and where these thoughts were just very clear. You know, they were very, like, they weren't in the back of my mind. I really sort of, like, was thinking about this and thinking about Either everything ends and there's eternal nothingness for like your soul or you or whatever, or everything is infinite and never ending, and that can almost seem like the scarier of the two options. You know, the idea that like this never ends, it's like that means you can't. That means it can't end, and you don't have a choice, and you'll never. You're trapped forever. And the thought of that, I had this feeling that God is kind of all of us, and that everything that happens is a way of avoiding the fact that we or it or everything is eternal, and there's no escape, and existence is just. It's like this endless prison, and the alternative is the endless prison of like nothingness. And the eternity of existence was we're all afraid of death, right? But then, like, to me, living forever or existing forever is scarier in a way. So it really terrified me, and I couldn't. When you think about certain things, you can't really logically put them into perspective. Like, you think of the concept of heaven, like whether you think of it in a Christian traditional sense or any form of the idea of heaven or some sort of peaceful, blissful afterlife, where you're like, oh, okay, I'll die and my soul will be there, and my dog and my family members, and that will be amazing. And then you just think, why? Like, well, then what was the point of all this? And what's the point if you're in eternal peace and happiness? Why would my dog be there? Why would I need anything to be there? Why would I be at that point? My existence is like erased by the sort of omnipresence of this feeling of peace, or it just doesn't add up. It doesn't add up with your concept of yourself, or with the only way it adds up is in some framework of like some universal consciousness that we all share, and where we're all just the same being. And it just, I don't know, there aren't a lot of stories you can tell yourself that really make sense, that are positive. So I guess that is where faith comes in, where you just have to have faith in something bigger than you that you don't understand, and that there is some, whatever we would call, meaning to all of it. And I guess that is probably the origin of faith in people anyway. It's like just thinking, like, it's basically saying there's shit outside of my brain and there's shit outside of my conception, and there very well could be, like, really there very well could be, but inside your own conception of the universe as a modern human, I don't think there is any good to be had. I don't think it's even worth thinking about, to be honest. I don't think you'll get anywhere doing that, and I don't think it will do any good. So it's like, okay, fucking carry on living my sort of normal day-to-day life to the best of my abilities, do the best things I can, and hope that there is something beyond my comprehension in the universe.
Yeah, I think it would be a waste of time for me to think about too deeply, because I'm not smart enough. I don't have the capacity to connect the things that we know now to bring humanity even 1 millimeter closer to what the full frame of reality is. But I do think there are people that it may be a good thing that they spend their lives just being obsessed with this question, and it brings them fulfillment. And maybe by the end of their life, we just have just a small, just like the tiniest bit of more understanding of the reality of the universe. Because where some people's minds are, like, I would say where almost everyone's mind gets caught, their mind and whatever capacities they have can mix together in a way that connects things that most people aren't able to. And I suppose that may bring us closer to the understanding of reality, while other people are doing things that are, just like podcasting or making music or being a lawyer, being an accountant. Like there are people that wake up every day and they just, for like 16 hours, they just think about the fabric of reality. And it's such a small amount of people, but for those people, it's not, I don't believe it's a waste of time. Hopefully it's not a waste of time. And I'm excited to kind of feed off of their work throughout the course of my life, just to see what step we can take closer to understanding what the fuck this all actually is. Because it does seem pointless after a while, like you said, to just keep going down the rabbit hole and keep thinking about it, because it starts to take away from the things that I'm doing in the moment. And it's not my work. Like I can't really do anything with it. But for those people who can, it's a very, it's a daunting but exciting time to try to figure out what is going on, because it seems like the technology is catching up to test that, to test these realities out in different ways. Because a lot of people have had thoughts on reality for hundreds of thousands of years, but we weren't able to actually test it. And it seems like we're kind of on the brink of being able to test things in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine even, 100 years ago or 10 years ago. Like it's just going so fast.
I don't think technology will ever make any of it clearer in that sense. I think I don't think it can. I think there are certain things it can't get past. A thing that helped me, because I went through a phase where I was obsessed with this, and it was really, it drained the color out of my life. It made me so depressed, and I remember reading that Nietzsche talked about eternal return, the idea that everything happens over and over again. And because I was in such a negative headspace, I just took the negative parts of it, and I was like, oh, Nietzsche believed in this too. He was also worried about this idea that you repeat everything endlessly and that there's only so many ingredients and it just keeps... But actually what he said was, it's a good mental exercise to do with yourself, just for even for the betterment of your own existence, your own life. And it helped me a lot. Like he said, if a demon came to you, the way he phrased it was a bit weird, but he said, if a demon came to you and told you that everything that you're doing now, you're going to do, all of this has happened before and all of this is going to happen again, would you curse him and think that he came from hell, or would you be so grateful and thank him and tell him that you love him for telling you this fact? And it's in that sense, it can apply to your day-to-day life, because it comes down to how in tune are you with everything, and how much are you living with a sense of freedom and peace. And like, really, if you really feel like everything you're doing is exactly right and is exactly what you should be doing, and you're fully connected, then maybe that idea isn't so bad as well. Maybe actually it could be amazing. Maybe you get to that point and you think, actually, this is perfect. What's wrong with just this happening for eternity? Like, this is good, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of that, or probably most of it, has to do with luck too, because so much of the trajectory of our lives has to do with the location we're born in, the family we're born into, the opportunities that you have just by pure luck. Like, I didn't get to choose that I was born in Long Island, New York, which is, middle upper class suburbs for the most part, into the family that I was born into with good parents in a place that's not war torn or disease torn in the time that I was born into.
Right. So yeah, the city as well.
So yeah, I would say for sure, if the demon came to me today and said, you're going to have to relive this life exactly as it happened and for another 28, 29 years, that prospect seems like something I would take in a heartbeat rather than something else, because I've been cast such a good role of the die. But if I was, if I was born into Ukraine in the 1930s and my entire country was being starved out by Stalin, and the demon said, you have to come and live the last 28 years of your life, I might be like, fucking shoot me in the head. Like, I'm not doing that shit again. Like, I watched my entire family die. My village was burned to the ground. You know, I was basically dead the last 5 years of my life anyway, just waiting to starve to death. Like, that seems horrible. But yeah, yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna. As I was saying that, I was thinking about Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and he had one of the most shitty casts of the die of all time, which is living in a concentration camp during the Holocaust. And he, you know, he seemed to have found a way through that. So that would be an interesting question to ask someone like that, someone who had lived through the worst atrocity of all time, and say, do you want to live this life again? You can only live this life. You can't choose something else. Would you like to just be gone for eternity, or you can keep living this over and over? It would be interesting to hear what Viktor Frankl would say.
Yeah, and it would probably be hard for him to explain in words if he did say yes, like why. But in the other example you gave as well, yeah, I mean, like you might stumble upon something so profound just mentally that you thought, okay, all of this was worth it. And so if all of it happens again in the exact same way, it will all be worth it again. But all of this highfalutin stuff, I guess, when it comes down to things like losing loved ones and stuff, a lot of that goes out the window anyway, doesn't it? You don't really have time to even fucking think about that type of shit. And you think, yeah, in face of real crisis, you might not have these thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. We could keep going down that rabbit hole for literally the rest of our lives. And I feel like just record a continuous podcast for 80 years. And at the end of the podcast, we'd probably be further away from the answer. Like the actual answer would be so different from where we were able to get to. So it is like it's just a never ending thing that hopefully we'll have a glimpse into. Like, I'm excited just to see where we can get to with technology. I think there are things that are exciting that are going on right now, especially the way that biology and physics and chemistry are all starting to blend into this kind of master hand, where it seems like a lot of scientists are realizing that they're not separate. Like, there is something that includes everything, like an actual theory of everything, of why when you cut a salamander's hand off, it knows how to stop when the hand starts to I'm blanking out on the word for the process, but when it starts to grow again, like there's something that tells that hand how to stop when it becomes a full hand. And it's not just physics, it's not just chemistry, it's not bio. Like, there's some master process at work that we don't understand yet. And yeah, it's just like a rabbit hole of a mind fuck, but I'm sure we could keep going endlessly.
Yeah. A placebo effect as well, right?
Yeah.
Seems to be a similar convergence of all those things. Like, how can you trick yourself into taking medicine that you didn't take, in effect, you know?
Yeah.
Seems.
Well, speaking of taking things, I wanted to get into your YouTube channel, BigDome. And I mentioned earlier in the conversation, that's actually how I came across you. I came across your video on Kratom. And I wanted to ask you, since you record so many in-depth drug experiences on YouTube, which I enjoy, speaking of rabbit holes, I went down the rabbit hole of going through different drugs, some that I have taken, a lot that I haven't. And I wanted to ask you, what's the first drug you ever tried that was off the beaten path? So it's not, caffeine, booze, weed, like it's something that really wasn't on the mainstream radar for you, and how was that experience?
I guess it depends how off the beaten path you mean. Mephedrone was the first like drug I tried. I guess it's referred to in other places as like meow meow or MCAT, and sometimes in America it's broadly categorized as bath salts, along with loads of other drugs that were legal at the time that were made in Chinese labs, and you could buy it very cheaply from the internet. That was the first drug I tried apart from weed or alcohol.
You said it's called Mephedrone or Methadrone?
Mephedrone, just Mephedrone. That was what got me into doing the drug videos on BigDome, actually, because I did a couple of videos on Mephedrone. I mean, I started that channel just because I'd gone through a breakup and I was like lonely, so I just thought I'm just going to sort of put my thoughts out into the world. Yeah. I did these Mephedrone videos, and they got I started
podcasting. Sorry to cut you off. I started podcasting after a breakup, by the way, so maybe there's a similar, we're in our simulation obeys similar laws, that when you go through a clusterfuck of emotion, you start just talking to people or yourself.
Then you have so much free time suddenly, right? When you're not in a long-term relationship. Like,
exactly. It's like people I'm asking guests on, and at the beginning they're like, this is totally because this person is interested in me, which I was, but in a way it's also like reaching out for connection. But sorry to cut you off. You're talking about the Mephedrone experience.
Yeah, it is amazing, and that's the best thing about the internet, I think. And yeah, those are the only things I've done really that just seem to have gotten picked up by the algorithm on YouTube. I always just thought this was like a mythical thing that happens to other people. I mean, they haven't got a huge amount of views, but I didn't really post them anywhere. And just that word, Mephedrone, I think so many people who were around at that time and remembered the sort of Mephedrone craze had at some point looked at a Mephedrone video on YouTube, and the minute they saw that, they were like, oh shit, Mephedrone. It's something that invokes a kind of a weird nostalgia in people, and maybe a bit of disgust, and also it's very euphoric. It's a sort of euphoric stimulant kind of drug, I guess. It's somewhere like maybe a cross between MDMA and cocaine. It's got the sort of instantaneous pleasure and ridiculousness of cocaine, and then it's got the empathetic kind of euphoric feeling of MDMA.
Sounds like a hell of a time.
Man, like, I don't want to encourage it because it's dirty, really, that stuff, and you can't really get it now anyway. Yeah. But man,
did you say it was legal at the time?
It was legal. You could buy a gram of it for like £8 or £9 on the internet. So like $11 or $12.
Yeah.
And a gram would easily do you a night, like easily. You would. I mean, when you first start, a gram would do like 3 or 4 people probably. I can't remember, but. I mean, to be fair, you have the lines of it are much bigger than what you would have with a normal drug. Mm-hmm. And we used to just really, you should crush it into a powder, but we used to just sniff it as like crystal. It burns like fuck, man. It's like sniffing crushed glass, really. It's like so painful. And you get so addicted to that pain as well. It feels really nice after a while because you associate it with the thing.
Could you not grind it up into a powder? Like the crystals were so hard.
Oh no, we were just fucking idiots. Basically, it was really.
You're snorting the rocks.
Yeah, it's like crystal. It's like coarse sea salt, and you could crush that sea salt into fine, powder. And one of my friends did. He used to crush his, and we all just thought he was being like a fucking nerd. We were like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Makes it last longer," and we just kind of ignored him. But yeah, it's so, I mean, I remember I was really scared to have it. And then the first time I had it, I was just like, fuck, like I didn't want to move. And I just remember sitting in a chair, and I was so comfortable in this chair, and I'd put my head to the side, and I was talking to people like out the corner of my mouth. I couldn't really open my mouth. And I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever felt. This is fucking amazing. I don't want to move and shit. And people were being a bit like, okay, chill out. But I think I had that in me, like, to just really, I suddenly was like, oh, this is how I've always wanted to feel, like this is what I want life to be like. And yeah, it felt incredible, but it was very easy to go over the top on it. It was like, you would get very, especially when you're a teenager and you're just like ridiculous, you know, and you're full of like hormones and shit, you just talk shit basically, and everyone fucking loves each other so much until like the next day when they like are paranoid and don't like each other and don't trust each other and don't want to be around each other. And it all would just get very, for a while, for quite a few years, I couldn't even think about it. As soon as I thought about the Mephedrone era, I was just like, oh, and I just wanted to block it out.
Yeah.
Now I do look at it with a lot of nostalgia, and I find it funny to remember it. But
what do you think that was trying to block it out? Was that shame? Was that you just didn't want to think about it because it would make you want to get back into it? Like, what was the feeling that made you push it away?
Shame and sort of embarrassment, and a feeling of, the feeling of loss of control, like thinking that, I would sniff a line of it and then just the rest of the night was on a whim. Like I wasn't really making conscious decisions, or I would get drunk and then I'd be like, have to buy some Mephedrone, and then do that. And then the whole night is just, again, it's like the amount of times we all just completely lost control of ourselves, and then you don't want to come down, and you do anything to like get more and to stay awake and keep doing it. And it gets very, there's something about that feeling, I think, that makes you cringe when you remember it,
Yeah, that's insane that for a period of time you can buy the offspring of cocaine and MDMA. Like if they fucked, that was just a pill online that you could purchase for $10. Like that's wild. And I didn't know, like I've done some more research. I don't know if it's a designer drug or where it comes from, but there's so many things out there that are legal that I wasn't even aware of that seem to have similar effects based on what other people are saying on Reddit and like forums like that where I've looked around. But that's nuts that you could buy something like that for such a cheap amount of money and just like have it delivered to you like an Amazon package. That is insane that you could just that easily get your hands on something like that.
Yeah, it was dangerous, and it gave it an air of legitimacy that meant people who wouldn't even smoke weed were taking this. So it really like swept through the whole. It was a very small town, and it just like kind of took over. Like it was really surprising. I mean, it really changed the atmosphere in the town. Like it became very popular in I wouldn't even say my social group, in my age group in general. I mean, more normal kids, they had tried it. They wouldn't necessarily say they were using it all the time. A lot of them, I think, were normal and well-rounded enough where they would maybe have 1 or 2 weekends on it and think, that was nice, but I don't really want to keep doing this because it's affecting my studies or my life and it's a bit crazy. But they would try it, I mean, everyone, because people would say, don't worry, have a line, it's legal, it's fine. Like I bought it online and it just... And it was so cheap. It was just like so fucking cheap.
Quick bathroom break, and now we're back. Right before we left off, you said that Mephedrone was the best feeling that you've had. Was that more of a like, because you said it's a combination of cocaine and MDMA, and you spoke about kind of leaning back in your chair, kind of sluggishly and talking to people. Did you feel mentally like you were sluggish in a way, like you almost zanned out, barred out, something like that? Like were you mentally awake and just kind of like physically sitting back? Like what was if you had to describe the best feeling, what were kind of what was the internal chatter like? What was the physical sensation like? Things like that.
It was like just pure like euphoria and physical pleasure, like this feeling of like, it's almost like a physical optimism. It's like you just feel so open to everything that's going on and it just feels really pleasurable. I mean, it's like it's like a cross between a perfect mix of kind of physical and mental pleasure. You just feel good, and that doesn't do it justice, because when you think of feeling good, you imagine it in a day-to-day sense, feeling upbeat or whatever. But it's a lot more, because you've got this feeling coursing through your body as well, where it's just like, it's just so fucking good. I don't know how to describe it. It was stimulating, I guess. And people thought it was weird that I was just sitting in the chair. They were all like, why don't you want to get up and like move around? But I think I was enjoying it so much that I didn't want to, it's like if you see like a beautiful bird on your lawn and you're like, don't move, don't move, don't move. Just fucking sit here and stare at it. I didn't want it to go away. And I just wanted to sit there and take it in. And I guess other people were maybe a bit more relaxed about it, but I was just like, this is good enough. I don't need anything, I'm just, but I've always been that way a bit. I mean, like with MDMA, for example, a lot of people think of that as a drug for like raving and partying. And I never have. For me, I always wanted to just like chill on it, basically. Maybe walk around a bit, but not like be super active, and enjoy the kind of mental and physical sensation of it more, rather than the stimulatory effects.
Go ahead.
Well, just to your question, like the only one thing I guess is when you have a thought and you just have an inane thought, like I'll be like, oh, I want to like ask you about your shirt or whatever, or say I like one of those paintings on the wall, and all the endorphins in my brain and body are like, yes, ask that question. That's so good. That's exactly the right thing to say. I can't wait to hear the answer. This is so brilliant. And like these endorphins are telling you this, and it wouldn't matter what thought I had. I could have a completely different thought. I could want to ask you about your microphone or something. Whatever it was, my brain was just flooding me with like, oh, this is just perfect. Everything is so great. Everything is so good, which is ridiculous, really, but drugs can induce that.
Yeah, it sounds almost like Adderall in a way, like snorting Adderall. I somehow made it through college without trying Adderall, and then when I started studying for the CPA exam for accounting, because I was an accounting major in a different life and use none of that now. Except when I filed my taxes. But I was studying for the CPA exam, and it was so dull, like the most boring shit you can imagine. And one of my friends was prescribed Adderall, and then I took it just as the tablet first, and everything just became instantaneously interesting. And I couldn't wait to tell my friend that I was sitting across from about tax law, which 30 minutes before was the most inane, just fucking burned out subject in my mind that I did not want to visit at all. And then it made accounting interesting, which if anyone's like, not that Adderall needs an advertisement, and I'm not suggesting people take it if they're not prescribed it, but if there was going to be an advertisement for it, I would say it makes accounting interesting. And I started drinking on it and then snorting it before I would go out. And I just remember the Adderall combined with the alcohol would make me feel so like everything I thought had to be said. And it was the best idea, more than just drinking alone, because drinking kind of lowers the inhibitions and raises the ego where you feel a little bit superhumanish in a way with your thoughts and ideas, but Adderall just exacerbated that to a level I'd never experienced. And when you were talking about just having to get things out, like I see a painting on the wall and I want to tell this person my thoughts on it because it is undeniable how brilliant my comments are in that moment. That's the way that I thought when I would, look at someone's sneakers in a bar and I would just have to tell them that why the design on it was pleasing to me. And after I said it, I'd be like, yeah, like this was a substantial moment for this person. Like they're gonna, their life is changed by how I just described their sneakers to them.
Yeah, you'd be like smiling and feeling so, and then as part of you is like, why can't I just be like that? Really, It's pretty, and it makes you think when someone is like really mean to you or something, you think like they probably just feel like shit. Basically, because when you're on like MDMA, for example, and you feel so peaceful and good and euphoric, you're just so fucking nice to everyone. Like, and you just want to be, why wouldn't I be nice? You feel a generosity of spirit because you feel like you have all this goodness inside you. So you're like, why wouldn't I be nice? And then when you're on a come down, you're like, I have no fucking time to be nice. I don't want to be nice to anyone. I'm not interested in anything. Just leave me alone. You know, it's weird. And it does put into perspective, I guess, why some people are such dicks, really, because probably a lot of the time they just don't feel good.
Yeah. That's one of the more, it might be the most positive aspect that experimenting with drugs like MDMA or Adderall has had on my life, that knowing that frame of mind is possible, and I may not be able to tap into it in the same way where I'm sober or I'm drinking coffee, but I know what it feels like to be completely overwhelmed with warmth and kindness when I just see someone that has a clothes that I like, or just having a basic conversation, meeting someone for the first time. I can tap into the emotions of past moments where I'd felt those overwhelming sensations. And because I know that, in a sense, I've done repetitions like that before. Like I played baseball for almost 20 years. And part of the reason why I had confidence when I went on the field is because I know I was performing repetitions of exercises and pitches in the past that I could tap into when it was game time. And in a way, it's almost like the repetitions that I've had on different drugs and the way that I've treated people that have been positive, because I've also had experience where I felt ashamed too, like, what the fuck am I saying? You know, how could I do that? Shit like that. But the positive experience has acted as a repetition where I can then say, okay, I've been here. You know, it's not going to be the same thing when I'm not on this drug, but I know that it's possible for me to open my soul in a way where I can just be 10% more kind in this moment, or just 10% more curious, and let that lead the way, rather than give in to the feeling of, yeah, fuck this person, or I'm feeling this way right now, so therefore I have to live through the half-life of this emotion until it's over, rather than trying to consciously flip a switch and just tell myself, okay, just be a little bit kinder and see what happens, because I've done that before.
Yeah. I think that is exactly what's good about drugs. I think if a drug changes you, I think it's failed, and it's a bad thing. It shouldn't change you. It should just give you it should show you the possibility of change. Like, and I think that's what puts people off, is if, you know, you hear about someone who's done like ayahuasca or something, and they're like, they're totally different. And even if it's positive, you think, oh, that's a bit scary. Like, they've gone away and done this thing, and it's almost like they're not there anymore. It's a new person. But it's not. It's not that the drug changed them inherently or chemically. It's that it broadened their perspective in the same way that going on holiday might, you know, traveling to a foreign country or just meeting new people. It broadens your perspective, and it shows you other options. So exactly like you say, you realize, like, oh, you can actually just feel very open towards others. It is possible. So yeah, like you say, you might not be able to fully access it, but you know that it's possible, and you can access a little bit of it. And I think that is what makes them so good. Even when they're bad experiences, you can think, okay, I can fall into paranoia. That's a thing that can happen to me, so I have to be cautious of that. Whatever it is, it's really about how you interpret that information moving forward that determines the effect it has on you, unless you abuse the drug so heavily that it has a chemical effect on you as well, which is where I think the big problem is really with things like MDMA. You know, the perspective broadening effect is incredible, but if you do it all the time, like I did, you just get so depressed.
Yeah.
And it will override. You know, you really only need to have a few experiences on it to see like how amazing the world can be and how different your mind can be. You don't actually need to do it a lot.
So was Mephedrone, it sounds like it was less intense than MDMA. Because my first MDMA experience, I was actually at a festival. I was at Lollapalooza, and I just remember I had such a good time, but the next day I felt so like I was lucky enough to not have the intense, you know, come down of being depressed for a few days after that people describe, but I just felt like like I was just so tired that I couldn't imagine doing that again quickly and having it be a positive experience. Was Mephedrone like that, or were you able to do it back to back to back nights and feel like this isn't completely wearing me out?
No, at that age we didn't stay up too long. I think the longest we did was like 2 days, maybe a day and a half. Later in life, I got into like long benders on other stuff, and that is like the worst thing you can do. But I think to us, to be honest, the idea of staying up for multiple days was just, it was so alien that even our sort of fiendishness for this drug wouldn't really push us there, because it was not something we really thought you could do. Do you know what I mean? And we had to go to school and shit. So it got to a point we would do it every weekend. Sometimes we would do it multiple weekends in a row. I think a couple of times maybe we did it in the week after having done it at the weekend. But no, it wasn't, certainly in the manner in which we were doing it, it wasn't easy to just keep doing it over and over again. There'd be quite a long process of feeling, as you say, like exhausted and having to like sit around smoking weed and feeling really bad and getting into some quite nasty psychological states, really.
Yeah.
What
was nasty?
One thing as an adult when you...
I was just going to say, what was nasty about the psychological state? When did it start to turn bad?
Well, a lot of the positivity from the drugs, I think, was masking a lot of weird social stuff that was going on anyway. So I always just felt like a weirdo and stuff. I always felt very bad about, well, I mean, not always totally bad about myself. My actual self, I guess, but felt very bad socially. I felt very, like inadequate socially and like whatever else, and had a lot of insecurities and demons and shit. So those were there anyway, and we used to all smoke way too much weed, and we were kind of always in some kind of bad state, I would say. And then there would just be these days where you weren't that way when you were taking drugs, and then it would all come sort of crashing back down, and you'd feel weird around each other, and you disassociate a bit, and this part of you is like, why am I here? Like, I know why I'm here, but I don't really know why I'm here in this room. I suddenly feel like I don't know these people, and I have nothing to say to them, and I don't want to say, and part of you is like, why 3 hours ago was this the best feeling in the world, and I couldn't wait to talk to these people about anything and everything, and now I don't want to say what, there's nothing I want to speak to them about. I don't want to really be around them. And then you start to feel paranoid, like, did I do something wrong? Does everybody think I'm a weirdo? Is my life terrible? And you just start having all these anxious thoughts. And then I would start thinking about highfalutin sort of universal concepts and things as well, and life and death and shit. And it would all just get very unpleasant and bleak, and we weren't really eating or sleeping properly, so it was just that kind of weird drug-induced paranoia, I guess, which is if you make drugs your lifestyle and you're not careful, that just becomes normal. That those bad feelings, you sort of accept them as just part of life, like feeling absolutely terrible and there being nothing you can do about it. That becomes a regular occurrence if you take too many drugs. And eventually it becomes everything.
Yeah, that feeling of sitting around with people and feeling connected to them, and then just a couple hours later feeling like, what the fuck am I doing here? I've had that when I've done cocaine. And the way that it typically happens is someone will have coke and then other people form in a group of strangers, like half people that you know. It's almost like when a fucking lion kills a gazelle and then the other lions kind of go around it and just kind of pick off the other parts of the gazelle that the lion's not eating. It felt like that in a way, where the coke was like a fucking open carcass and then people gravitate towards that, and all of a sudden you're standing in an apartment kitchen feeling so euphoric at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and then a few hours later when it runs out and the sun starts to come up, you were just having, really in the moment exciting conversations with people and feeling connected to them and bouncing ideas off the wall that were, 99% shit anyway. I used to have a note file in my phone of things that I would think of. And I remember, well, I still do, but I remember one night that I was on cocaine, I had like 3 times the length of a note that I had ever created sober before. And it was just things like move to your favorite podcaster's city and just make them give you a job as a producer so you would find your way into the podcasting world. Like go knock on Joe Rogan's door and like tell him that you came here to be his new producer or something. Like just like the dumbest shit that you could think of. And then that feeling goes away and the come down starts to happen. And then you're like, how are these things so close together? And it's being tied together by the drug, opposite sides of the same coin. And it does baffle you in a way, because you could be walking home or taking the subway home and you're just feeling like such shit. And you could rewind the clock, just an hour and a half or 2 hours, and you were having the time of your life. So it is this weird dichotomy that a drug like cocaine, and it sounds like Mephedrone also induces, where it's like this kind of instant pleasure, euphoria, and it fades very quickly. Like there's a very harsh reality check.
Yeah, and it's exactly as you say. Coke is the perfect example, isn't it? It's so, like you say, it's so close together. It's weird. And the thing with Coke is you don't really get much of value that you can take from it afterwards when you reflect. You just sort of think, man, I was a fuck. Yeah, you have ideas like that. And you're like, yeah, why the fuck not? Man, he'll probably like it. He'll probably think it's great. Like, yeah, you just got to fucking try it, haven't you? It'll be difficult, but why not? Yeah, you got to take risks, blah, blah, blah. And you talk someone else into it who you barely know, or to like making a movie or something. And then, yeah, you feel the opposite when you're coming down. You're like, I can't do anything, and everything is terrible. My life is like so limited. It's weird, isn't it? It's a disconcerting feeling. Yeah, I don't miss that. I don't really take a lot of drugs anymore, and I don't miss that part of it. It's so inevitable, and you always tell yourself, no, I can just power through. But if you take enough, you'll always have like terrible come downs and be in terrible states psychologically.
Yeah, so I've done coke probably 10 to 12 separate occasions spread over the course of 5 or 6 years. And I remember thinking towards the last couple of times that I had done it, it's probably like 2.5 years ago, like just the first bump that you do just starts the clock to feeling like shit. Like it's such an intense short acting drug that it's almost depressing to take a bump or do a line, because I know I'm starting the clock. And it's, in that sense, it was different, a lot different than taking something like, one of my friends extended release Adderall, because it's like this 6 to 8 hour feeling that kind of just like slowly comes down and you don't really feel the same way. And that's not great either. But just, I remember just the sharpness of cocaine just feeling like a downer to begin with. And I was like, it's so much better to just not do this. It was fun while I was doing it, but it's just like, and at 45 minutes, I'm going to feel worse than how I'm feeling now. And I know that. And there are other drugs that are not like that, or just, hanging out and not doing coke, maybe just having a few drinks. But it's just like, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like a well-designed drug. It's definitely fun, but the design of it is shitty.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, it's one I would never ever recommend to it. If anyone ever asks about it, I'm just like, don't bother. Like it's really not worth the bother. It feels really, I wouldn't even say it feels really good. It's just, you just want it. It's all like, it's just like, it just makes you want it, doesn't it? It's like, I used to feel very excited to pick it up and feel very excited to start the night. but that's because, I mean, you had the foresight to think, okay, if I take this bum, I know I'm going to feel like shit soon. But I was just so focused on getting the pleasure of it that I would just be I wouldn't think beyond that moment, you know. But it is, yeah, it's a total waste of time, really. Coke, it's so fucking rubbish, and people, no one grows as a person during a period of cocaine use. Most people, I've seen a lot of people become really bad, like, and kind of lose themselves in it and lose a lot of their good qualities as humans and stuff. And it turns you into a sort of pleasure chasing weirdo, I think, a bit, an egotistical pleasure chasing weirdo.
Yeah, I will say that if I had to pick the top experiences that I've had on Coke, obviously the quality of the drug is going to be the most important effect. But when I would be out and I'm doing it in the bathroom, like, it's in such a rush, I didn't look back on that as a pleasant night. Like, I had a lot of shame associated with that. But I would dare to say that there were a couple nights where doing cocaine may have been a net positive on the night, because it was more of a ritualistic use, like just setting the music with a few friends, not having a lot of it, like Philips Hue lights, just like doing it off of like vinyls, cool surfaces, like whatever we had in my friend's cool apartment that was living out in Denver. And it was just like a very, like, the whole aspect was ritualistic. Like, we weren't just doing bumps in a porta potty at a festival. Like, and I think that carries over for most of my drug use, where if I have some sort of ritual behind it, like if it wasn't just about the drug, like it was about the way that I approach the experience too, there's a build up to it, I tend to enjoy that much more than just popping the drug for the immediate effect without any intention behind that. As silly as that sounds, like the intention to do cocaine, but like I do think that there's some, like, there's a little bit of room there to improve the experience with a drug like cocaine. It's much more of a wider gap that you can fill with other drugs like psychedelics, where the intention, I think, can sway you further one way or the other. But the ritual and the intention, for whatever reason, I looked back on those nights thinking that, yeah, that night was actually could have been better because of that drug, and I didn't wake up feeling like I wasted my time or like I went too far. And that it was very, 2 out of the 12 times that I did it. But when I approached it like that, it was something that I've, in an odd way, felt fulfilled by.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, I guess, when I think back, some of the early times we did it, like, I didn't have a tolerance, and it was okay to have half a gram of like reasonable Coke between two of us or whatever, and it would last the whole night. And when it ran out, for some reason, we didn't care. And then the more you start to care when it runs out, the more you, like you said, you focus just on the drug, not on the night, and you're thinking just about how it's going to feel when it goes up your nose, and that's when it becomes a waste of time. Can I just quickly write to someone about someone's just messaging me about a work-related thing, and it's popped on my thing, and I just want to tell them to stop messaging me.
No worries.
Cool. Yeah, done.
But yeah, just thinking about the ritualistic aspect and doing it for the drug, I think there's also a craving that starts to happen for the medium of which you take the drug. Like, just if I was to snort baby powder versus cocaine, like, there is some sort of fixation with just snorting, like the feeling of snorting something. And I experienced this when I used to dip in baseball, because I'm packing tobacco in my lip, and I did that for 3 or 4 years. And when I quit dip, I use these coffee pouches. Like, instead of tobacco, it had coffee grinds in it. And I just like, it was so hard to finally, like I found it was harder to quit doing that because I just loved packing my lips with like something and feeling the tightness of it like in my gums and like spitting something out, that I just kind of like, when my craving for tobacco left, I still had the craving for having something packed in there. And so it kind of extended the addiction in a way where I just kept packing coffee grinds for no reason because I was drinking coffee anyway. But there is some sort of euphoria. I don't know what it is, like what chemical process is going on without the drug in your system, but like the physical sensation of doing it, sometimes there's an attachment to, and it just feels good or it feels cool to do something like that aside from the drug itself.
100%. Yeah. Even I think smoking cigarettes, even some people have an image in their head of like, a cigarette, and like it doesn't really feel like that most of the time, but you're just like, my cigarette, and it's like for you, and it's in your control, and it's in your hand. And with weed a lot, I'd be getting towards the part of the day where I'd have my first bong of the day, and I'd be thinking like, I don't think this is going to make me feel good. Like, I think probably I'm going to have this bong and I'm going to feel anxious and I will be a bit directionless for the rest of the day. But I just have to have my like evening bong, and I would just have it. Even when I knew, I was like, and I would have it and I'd be like, yeah, I was right. This hasn't made me feel good. And I would do it anyway because it's like, yeah, I don't know. I still don't know exactly. I know I can sort of guess, a few reasons why, but some of it is just straightforward addiction, isn't it? But like, it's the ritual component, and I do think we just like doing stuff and having stuff. Like you just like to have a thing. It doesn't sometimes matter what it is.
Yeah, it can be with anything. It's like coffee or porn or smoking weed, whatever. I feel like my body has an internal clock for the physical sensations of some of those rituals. And then when it gets to be that time and I don't have my, my phone and my cock in my hand, or like a cup of coffee brewing and getting ready to push down the French press, there's something that I have to fill. I can't just, not that I want to stop drinking coffee, but if I were going to, or when I stopped watching as much porn, like, I feel like if you just stop and you don't insert another ritual that you'd rather have that has some sort of physical sensation, like listening to a podcast in bed instead of watching porn and kind of just putting your phone away, it's hard to just sit there and not do anything. At least for me, I felt like I've had to have some more sort of positive thing to do that's also associated with a physical activity, something that I'm doing physically that fills the space.
100%. It's very hard, isn't it? I used to be able to, I think, but now, it's very hard to just. I find it very hard to sit and watch TV. Even I don't, or a movie is like out of the question for me these days. And a podcast, if I'm listening to one, it's because I'm doing the dishes or something, or cooking, and then I feel good. I don't know if I feel good when I'm multitasking. I don't think I actually do. I think I just feel it feels efficient or something in a way that I enjoy. Did you, by the way, did you ever get into porn when you were on the Adderall?
I definitely jerked off on nights where I was drunk and also on Adderall, and I'm almost 100% positive I watched porn because I was watching it much more in college. But yeah, I did more than a few times for sure. And
it was just sort of normal. Same as it was. It kind of the same as always.
It was. I would say it was close to normal, except maybe my shuffling through the pornographic videos was more extended. Maybe because the Adderall was left over and I just had more attention rather than just finding a video, jerking off, and going to bed. But I can't. Nothing jumps out at me when I think about jerking off on, like an Adderall vodka soda bender. versus just drinking or sober. But I'm sure the Adderall had some sort of effect, but I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, I don't know with Adderall specifically, but stimulants and like amphetamines in general, you can get into because a lot of those drugs, it's harder to get a boner anyway, but then you can get very, well, like the way you said you became almost obsessed with the accounting thing you were doing. And like sometimes if your brain on a stimulant like that latches onto porn, it gets fucking weird, man. Like, because you can't do much anyway physically, but you just don't want to stop looking at porn. And you sort of think like, I want to stop looking at porn, but then there's some part of you is like, let me just open the porn up again and look at like 50 more videos.
Yeah.
And we got into, me and my ex, we got into taking amphetamines with GHB, and that kind of has the effect of like mellowing your body out a bit more, so you can actually like do shit on it.
GHB,
that was when I got into
like liquid ecstasy or something like that. I remember seeing it in Magic Mike, like where they took the capsule of the GHB, and it kind of seemed like ecstasy.
It's nicknamed that. Yeah, I would say it's a cross between ecstasy and alcohol, but then it has the kind of horniness of like a stimulant, and it makes you ridiculously horny.
So you were on that and Adderall, or that and amphetamines, watching porn. I could see how that could get you into some interesting places.
It's one of those things where you realize if you do that enough, you realize that like pleasure or whatever is not enough to make you happy. And it was good in a way, because I used to take it with my ex, and we would just like we would stay up for like 4 days watching porn and like shagging and doing weird stuff with the porn, and like it was really crazy.
Really,
it
like
didn't start like that.
Legitimately 4 days straight, almost no sleep.
That was one of the last times. It was 4 days, and I was really losing it by the end.
Wow.
And then taking Viagra because you've been awake for like 2 or 3 days, and then like it was a while where we were quite addicted to doing this. It started because we would take it, and then this wouldn't happen. We would just take it, and like sometimes we'd shag or whatever, and then we started having more conversations, and then it made us we were able to talk about things sexually that we wouldn't normally, and then be like, talk about things we were into and stuff, and porn we would watch. And then it just became like, that became really enjoyable. And then it basically, it got to a point where every other weekend or so we would stay up for like at least 2 or 3 days, watching porn obsessively. Basically, once the porn started, that was all that we did not do. So usually for the first 16 hours, no, not even, the first 8 hours of the night, maybe, at best, probably, we would just talk about stuff. We would just be like, let's not look at porn yet. Let's just be normal and like hang out. And then once the porn started, you just weren't going to do anything else. Once your brain gets the dopamine hit of GHB, amphetamines, porn, and this feeling of liberation, like you can't. It would get to a point where you'd finish and you just sit there, just looking at porn without even doing anything, just while you were waiting to like. It was crazy. It got real. It's referred to as like chemsex, and it's I guess like a craze as well. People take like meth, for example, and GHB and things like that, and I mean it gets really fucking dark. People stay up for like weeks and fucking like sex clubs and shit. It really gets quite disgusting. And we didn't do that. I mean, I've never taken meth or anything, but we did get into, in the privacy of our own home, this whole like fucking chemsex thing. And it's like the feeling is unbelievable. The mix of those drugs and then the sex and shit and the porn, because porn gives you such a dopamine hit that even sex in a way doesn't give you, because of the internet nature of it and the fact that you can click on so many things, you can choose things and you can cut, and it's a hard like kind of, experience to put out of your mind, I get. I mean, now I would never want to do the thought of it again. It's one of those things that makes me, to think about it, I'm like, oh God, that sounds disgusting. Like, to stay up for days, you just by the end of it, you like stink, and you've just been looking at porn. So it would get to a point where the week afterwards, I could not get porn out of my head. Like, I'd be walking around and it was just constant porn imagery in my head and porn noises, and like, it was like we were just haunted by all. We would literally watch porn for like 72 hours. Like, it would just, the amount of porn you get through would be insane.
So it's
crazy, man.
Would you watch porn during sex, or would it be like the pregame for the sex to get you in the mood?
Both. It's not, from a practical point of view, it's a bit like tricky, I guess, but there was a lot of sort of cuckoldry was going on between the two of us, kind of back and forth. Like, that became something that neither of us liked before, but then it became, in the context of this drug, it became like you just want to do like kind of weird, dirty stuff. So it became a lot of sort of back and forth, kind of vengeful, like cuckoldry. And there was something genuinely liberating about it, in a way, because it's like, in a way, you're sort of confronting things that would normally be so painful or scary, and then you're like, oh, this is all right, like, we can both handle this, and that's okay. And it felt, because in a lot of relationships there's this issue of like, with monogamy and shit, I guess a lot of the time that comes from the man. Maybe not these days, maybe that's changing, but it was always a bit of a difficult subject for us, I guess, and a bit awkward. And so it was this feeling of like, oh, now we can actually turn this into an enjoyable thing that we both do together, and it's like fun for us and feels positive. And I do genuinely believe in some sense it was, because you're like, okay, let's see what's going on behind this door. And you kind of open the door and you're like, all right, we still really love each other, and neither of us want the other to feel bad, and we both still are okay. But again, it was like, all right, we had that experience. We didn't really need to keep dwelling on it, but then it just got addictive, and we would try and not do it, and we would end up doing it again. And sometimes we'd put the videos on, but again, that was always a practical issue, and you'd want to use like headphones because there's like neighbors, and then it's like a laptop, and it was all weird. But
like you're railing your girlfriend out from behind, and you're both wearing Bose headphones through a splitter, and it's like connected to the same laptop. Just like, I got this. I've done this with podcasting before. I know how to hook us up, hook our audio up to the same video with this splitter. I'll figure it out.
We did actually literally use a splitter at one point.
That's amazing.
We bought one specially.
Amazing.
In a sense,
I mean, if the splitter works with that amount of physical activity and watching porn for that long, you could leave a really in-depth review on Amazon. Tell people how well the splitter works. But
it's durable.
Yeah, exactly. So the cuckoldry, that's watching someone else have sex with your partner, like in porn. Because I've seen cuckold before. I don't know if I've actually watched like a full video other than just clicking on it, but it's someone else. Like, you're walking in on someone else have sex with your partner, essentially. That's what cuckoldry is.
Yeah, specifically. I mean, to be honest with you, I think all porn is cuckoldry, because generally speaking, if you're watching porn, you're a man looking at a woman that you want to have sex with, and some other guy is having sex with her, and you watch that like millions of times. That's over and over again, all around the world. People are basically watching people they are attracted to have sex with someone else who's often more attractive than them as well. And it's very, So I do think that cuckoldry and porn are inexorably linked, and that's why it's become such a common insult. And why, I mean, look, for example, at stuff like...
I just wanted to say, what about POV porn, where you're essentially cutting out as much of the man as possible, and you're jerking off to this image of a girl who's riding someone, but you really can't see, or like, I guess maybe you could see him a little bit, but you're trying to imagine as if she's the one riding you, and you're not really thinking about, like, someone else is having sex with her, but in your mind, at least when I've watched those types of videos, like POV, what's so appealing to me is that I can almost sort of feel like I'm in that situation. I guess if I watched porn on VR, augmented reality, like on an Oculus or something, maybe it would feel more like I was the one doing it. But just watching it on my phone, I've had the feeling that, like, yeah, this is somehow more pleasing because I'm not seeing someone else do it. Not that I hate porn with someone else doing it, but the POV seems like an attempt to kind of give people that experience, give guys that experience, especially.
It's definitely much healthier mentally, I think. Yeah. And that was always my preference, but there's a few problems. One is usually it's not very good sex because she's staring at like a camera, like a guy in a GoPro or something, you know? And
Yeah,
it's like,
that's true. I never really think about that.
If they do have a good connection, it's because despite the angle being POV, they're still engaging to some degree, and so then it ruins the illusion. Or there's frequently a point, for example, like at the end when it's a guy whose voice is clearly not yours, and he's like, oh shit, and you're like listening to it, and you're like, oh, I'm listening to another man come and that's not how I would come, and that dick doesn't look like mine. There's often moments that break the illusion, and then now really I'm getting to a point I just fucking hate porn, like, but what I got to for a while was I would only wank once a week, wank Wednesdays I would call it, and I would only look at solo porn, and it was often in that vibe, like often they'll use dildos or whatever, and they're like, you know, it's like and it's actually, as far as porn goes, like a much more intimate experience. You'll have, it's like, that is how, because there's only one person on screen, and although they're not receiving you, you know, they're not really interacting with you, it's much more natural because you're just absorbing them, and there's nothing, you're imagining the action taking place. It really feels like there were some experience I had, like watching stuff like that, where I think like, yeah, this is fine, like this is a good thing to do, you know, like in the absence of sex there's nothing wrong with it really. Even that, after a while it becomes addictive and tiresome, but like I think that's much better. Or sometimes I get into weird shit, you know, and they use the machines and stuff, because it's like, oh, it's just a machine, I'm the machine, you know, and whatever, or just JOIs and shit. I think that's much healthier. You're looking directly at a person who's looking at the camera and shit, but it's still not natural.
Yeah.
But don't you think it's weird? I mean, for example, like probably the most famous like porn studio in recent years, or like whatever porn thing, has been blacked, and it's like, how many black guys are there? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, as in, who's watching this? It's not all black guys watching this. In fact, I'd be willing to bet the majority of the people watching it aren't black guys. That's a bit strange when you think about it. You know, like, why was that so popular? And I do think it's because porn has done a number on people, and it's made them think subconsciously, like, these are the people that women should be fucking. These are the men that are like, I want to see them fuck. They deserve sex. I'm just some fucking cuck in the corner. And I think it messes people up psychologically in a pretty big way, because you can see the trends in porn have changed so much as well towards stuff like that. And like, really, unless you were a massive black guy, why do you want to watch a massive black guy having sex with a woman that you're attracted to? It's quite strange. If you are, on the other hand, if you are a massive black guy, it must be like, wow, this is perfect. There's all this porn that's made exactly for me.
Yeah, I would say, you know, when I do watch porn, it's typically more amateur porn. You know, a couple, whether they're together or not, just kind of sets up a camera, and it feels like you're watching a realistic sex session. That's at least what I enjoy. But I don't really, for me at least, I don't try to replace myself with the guy in that scenario. If I was to compare it to something, I would say it's more in line with how I listen to a podcast. Like, it's two people having an experience, that I am a third party to, and those people don't even know I exist. But that experience is that experience is something that I find fulfilling, and I don't necessarily feel the need to embody the host of the podcast in that moment. So if I was going to draw a parallel, it's very different. Obviously, there is a podcast. Coincidentally, I don't know if you watch No Jumper with Adam 22.
Mm-hmm.
So he
Not
started.
what I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, he started an OnlyFans where him and his partner have conversations with porn stars on the public platform, and then you can go to the OnlyFans and see where they fuck after. So it actually is starting to cross over porn and podcasting. But for me, I would say it's more when I find myself enjoying a porn video, especially the amateur ones. I've found this experience, this sexual experience that for whatever reason I find pleasing, but I don't need to fulfill the illusion that I am the guy in that video. It's more just me kind of sitting back and enjoying the way that it turns me on. And I'm not
a lot of people have
yeah.
sort of said that to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's a more well-rounded. You must then, I presume, have no issue if you watch lesbian porn, for example. You could just watch it and just enjoy it. Or do you? Because I get I'm like, these women are beautiful. You know, often the women in lesbian porn, they're way more beautiful, and what they're doing is so beautiful. But I'm like, what the fuck am I? Like, what's going on? How can I wank to this? I don't have a vagina. That I'm clearly not there. But I guess for other people, that's not an issue.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. I mean, I've definitely looked at lesbian porn, but it's been a while. I would have to, I guess, watch it now and see how I feel now that I'm thinking about that. But when I'm watching amateur porn, and it's not lesbian porn, it's between a man and a woman. I don't know. Like, maybe subconsciously I'm doing something where I'm switching roles with the guy in a way that I don't even realize. But at least what I can observe on the surface from my experience is that it turns me on and I enjoy what's happening. There's not anything in the video that's like too distracting, or I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like, I don't want to watch this. It's just like, in a way, pleasant. It's a woman that I'm attracted to. Like, I'm not really into the done up, like, fake tits, brazzers version of porn. I actually remember we would have passwords in high school being passed around, and someone would manage, like, they'd pay $5 for the login and then send it around the whole class until the brazzers figured it out. But I remember watching that sort of porn, like the storyline where Johnny Sins comes into the bathroom and has a 9-inch cock and then fucks this girl that's, you know, stuck in the washing machine from behind, and she's got tits that are like double D's, massive, like all done up. I watched that for a little bit, but I quickly switched to the more amateurish vibe where it's just like two people fucking. And I don't know why I like that better. Maybe it's because it's like it seems more attainable in a sense, but at least it hasn't crossed my mind consciously that I'm imagining myself as the guy.
Yeah, I've always respected people that are into amateur porn. Quite a lot of people have said this to me. They prefer amateur porn because it's more normal, and I understand that. I get why. It's never been something I'm into, really, particularly. But I get what people are avoiding by watching that, because the mainstream stuff is fucking horrific, man.
I think it's almost like
crazy.
if you were to walk by an apartment and you're just walking down the sidewalk in real life, and two people had their windows wide open, and you catch people fucking, like, that you'd be like, holy shit, like, this is crazy. And in a way, I feel like that's what amateur porn is like. It feels like, in a way, you kind of caught a glimpse of people fucking, and obviously they're doing it on purpose and they're uploading it, they're putting it out there. But it's almost like, that situation where, you're on the sidewalk, or maybe you see someone across your building, you're like, oh my God, they're having sex right now. And it's just, there's something about the organicness of it that amateur porn
Totally.
can imitate in a way, or cultivate, like the vibe that, like, oh my God, like I could look across the street and possibly see the same thing that I'm watching here. Like, it's not that far-fetched. So it in a way, I would say it's more voyeurism than cuckoldry for me. If I was to guess deep rooted, like what was turning me on about it, voyeurism would probably be a much bigger element than cuckoldry. But again, who knows? Like, I went to Amsterdam and watched a sex show, and it was one of the most unarousing experiences I've ever had. Like, I actually went with my girlfriend, and we went together, and we went to, I have the ticket on the table. I forget what the place is called, but it's like one of the most, storied traditional sex houses in Amsterdam. And it was these two people spinning on a circle, and there's a couch, and they're just kind of on this spinning platform, much like a car would be in a car lot, something like that, like the new model. And this girl was sucking his dick, and then they just started fucking, and they both looked just so mechanical and robotic. I didn't get hard once during the entire thing. Like, I actually fell asleep once, like 15 minutes in. I was like, my girlfriend woke me up, and she's like, do you want to go back? And I was like, yeah, I guess, like, this is kind of boring. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's voyeurism. Maybe there's some element of cuckoldry. Maybe it's just like finding the experience.
I guess it's just more realistic as well, isn't it? It's like when you commodify and cheapen it, it feels artificial. Like probably the sex show you saw is robotic because it's like they're just being paid.
Yeah.
It sounds fucking horrible, to be honest. I find stuff like that so, like, obviously I like watch porn and shit, but that kind of, the kind of sex show vibe and shit, and people who turn sex into this, like, I don't know, yeah, it gets really gross. Do you find now as well, I've noticed recently, like, just images, sexual imagery, just like nothing for me now, like because it's just 10 a penny, it's everywhere. And like I'll see images now of like women with the most unbelievable bodies and they're like, women now are so much hotter, I think, than they were like 10 years ago even. I see these images and I'm like, it's just a fucking 2D image, it does nothing. Whereas if I like talk to a woman, even it's not, it's just a little bit of a vibe or whatever, and we're just like getting on, I'm like so horny, and it's really enjoyable and exciting, whatever, and like my horniness is still totally there, but the visual component is fucking gone. Like, it does nothing for me. Like some of these images, I'm like, man, if I saw this 5 years ago, I would have lost my mind, and I just fucking don't care. Like, I think it's because of how, especially the rise of like OnlyFans and Instagram and all that, where you just see hot women all the fucking time, and to me, it doesn't mean really anything much at all now if a woman is like just purely physically hot, especially if it's in a sort of trashy way. Like, it does very little for me these days.
Well, it's like,
usually has to be a little touch more.
It's like the hedonic treadmill effect, where if you raise the speed, if you're watching more and more porn and it gets more and more intense, then the images itself, you see it in a sexual advertisement, that's like, the fucking seeing a stick of butter. And I still do feel aroused when I see images or I'm watching a show or something like that. I haven't watched porn enough to where I'm completely desensitized to that. So I suspect it's a bit of the hedonic treadmill effect, where you're just normalizing to the things that you've seen digitally. And it also seems like there's an element of the digital platform separating you from how you'd feel if that man or woman actually approached you in person. Because I remember having these conversations in college where we'd see someone on the Victoria's Secret fashion show, and one of my friends would be like, why is she in the fashion show? She's not that hot. And I'm like, if you saw that girl tonight and she walked into a bar and started talking to you, you would be like, like you couldn't get a fucking word out of your mouth. But because you see her on TV and she's also surrounded by other models, that also have very similar looks and frames to her. She doesn't stand out as much. So there's this separation of attractiveness to where it's probably like you're probably getting 10%, if that, of someone's actual attraction when you're seeing them on a page versus like, you know, if the same girl was to just walk into your apartment and start talking to you, even without any sexual implication, like just a conversation at a coffee shop. You know, when I was single and I was meeting girls on Hinge and then looking at their profiles and then meeting them in person, there are some of the most intense attractions and sexual connections that I had were not in line necessarily with the hottest girls, the girls who had the hottest profiles. There's something about the vibe of someone in person that you can't mimic on a platform like Hinge, where you're just swiping on pictures, that you can see someone in person and you're like, this isn't like the body language or the emotional connection, like all that stuff is missing. And for some reason, like the click just always, it doesn't always align with the image. Like sometimes I'll be talking to a girl and it's, you know, she's like not in a negative sense, like she looks pedestrian, like it's not someone that would be in a Victoria's Secret fashion show, but my attraction to her is so insane for whatever reason, and I can't explain it, but it's just something that happens in person that doesn't really happen when you're seeing images of someone.
Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? I think yeah, to some degree we're losing that. I was never aware of it when I was younger, and probably that was also because the vibe I would put out socially was so weird, because I was in this like porn fucking lizard brain, like visual kind of like trying to think of how I can wank to everything, and yeah, like interactions with people are so much, there's much fuller feeling in that regard. I also think the sad thing is women are becoming more like men in that way now, and they're really getting robbed by that, because for them it's so much less visual than it is for us, even like innately, like naturally, you know, like there's much more, like a lot of men can be attracted to a woman who they have zero respect for and they think is a fucking idiot and they don't like her as a person, and they can still find her really attractive. It's very rare for women, if they don't respect you as a man or don't think of you as in a certain way, it's very rare, typically, or at least it was, that they would be attracted to you. But I think now they're becoming, because of dating apps and social media and stuff and porn, they're becoming a lot more superficial and visual than they were in the past. And like, it's really, I think it's really robbing them and people in general of something, because yeah, it's like you say, certain people, their vibe when you meet them is it's totally different. But if your brain is centered around ticking certain boxes, it's yeah, you're robbing yourself of something else that might be a bit outside of your conscious mind, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because for women, having sex without discretion has taken on this role of female empowerment, which is odd, because I definitely agree that more men have sex without discretion, without emotional connection than women. But it's when I think about when I was a teenager and in my early mid-20s, where I had much less of an emotional connection having sex with women, that's not where I felt the most empowered. Like if there was a version of quote unquote, you know, male empowerment, it would be learning how important the whole experience is with a person that you are sexually connected to or going to be sexually connected to, whether it is a one night stand, you know, you meet someone and it is what it is, or, you know, it blossoms into a full on relationship. When I started to care about the experience as a whole and how sex was just one small slice of it, and the conversation in a way was sexual, the buildup, the emotional connection, like there are all these things that are sexy about meeting a person that are outside of fucking. that add to the experience and getting to know someone. And it's like women have taken the lowest form of male interaction and put that on a pedestal as this is empowerment, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, now it's our turn to be fucking dogs, basically. Like, we get to... No, it's beautifully put, man. It's so true. I remember when I was younger, I used to... basically, my goal was like... I thought, like, I'm a fucking genius and I'm going to be really successful in music and I need to be successful as quickly as possible and I'm going to, like, shag everyone, probably ruin my relationship, probably kill myself with cocaine. And that was, like, kind of innately, I didn't really think of it, but that was kind of, if I was being honest with myself, my plan was, like, basically, like, sex with random women, cocaine, and just, like, self-destruct. Because I thought, well, those are the things that make me feel good, so therefore those are the things that make me happy, and I want those things that I can't really have very easily. And I'm so fucking glad that I was not successful in the way I wanted to be, because I think I genuinely would have destroyed myself with those things. And it's taken me until now to realize, like, and similarly with the experiences of chemsex and stuff, to separate, like, base pleasure and, like, happiness, and to realize that, like, all of those things are a lot less powerful than, like, love or just doing things that you believe in and doing things that you're proud of. And I now feel like, I don't know, man. I feel fucking sorry for people. I used to be jealous of people who got famous when they were like 18 and they got all this money. And now I'm like, man, how can you? That would fucking destroy me. Like, I just would have never been able to fight off the intensity of the urges just to feel good and do whatever and get instant gratification. And now I've realized, like, no amount of that shit will ever fill the hole inside you. Like, no amount of cocaine, no amount of, like, random sort of horny sexual experiences, they'll just never... If you're not right with yourself and you're not right in your mind, those things will never be enough for you. And if you're not doing good things and you don't have the right things in your life, the right pillars, then you will never be right in your mind. So it's like, those things can be nice. It's a nice bonus, you know, like fun, pleasurable experiences. I'm not, like, denouncing it totally, but if you're dependent on pleasure for happiness, I think you're just fucked. And, like, that's the thing I'm so glad to have, you know, sort of rectified.
I have to ask you, speaking of the base pleasure, if you were going to separate long-term fulfillment from all the drugs that you tried, what's the best physical sensation you think you've ever felt on drugs or a combination of drugs?
The two I mentioned, Mephedrone. The first times I did that, and mixing... I fucking don't want to encourage it because it's such, like, it feels, when you do it, you feel like almost like an alchemist, like, this is too powerful, I shouldn't be able to do this. But mixing amphetamines and GHB, to be honest, is so fucking nice. But I wonder, like, it was a good thing that I was doing it with my girlfriend and we were able to kind of exercise these aspects of it. Because part of me is like, if I did that by myself, I would be trying to pick up women, I'd be going to prostitutes, I'd be like, I don't know what I would be doing, to be honest, like, if I had done it on my own, because it's so, it's like euphoria and horniness and stimulation and energy and focus all mixed into one. It's crazy. So that did feel, especially in comparison to cocaine, it felt like cocaine 2.0, because you get some of that with cocaine, you get the kind of horniness and the stimulation and but this was like, you take the GHB after the speed and you never really come down. It fades. Instead of coming down, you fade into the GHB. That shit was, like, dangerously nice, to be honest. I don't know if there's really a nicer a combination of in terms of a more wholesome and a high that you look back on with more fondness, a combination of an empathogen like MDMA with a psychedelic is fucking nice as well. Like, that really is my favorite. If I'm actually saying my favorite thing to do and a thing that I would probably always like to do, it's that. And that is a much more, you look back, you know, the next day you're like, oh, that was a really good night. I'm glad I did that. So things like mixing 4-HOMET with 5-MAPB and a little bit of caffeine. That's one of my favorite things ever because they blend beautifully. You're sort of tripping and you're in an interesting headspace, but you've got this euphoria, so you're not having to deal with the weirdness of the trip, which is kind of cheating and limits some of the interestingness of it. But you've got these beautiful visuals and you feel so good and you feel chatty and stuff, but you're also having interesting thoughts and you've got a sense of humor from the psychs and stuff. So it's really good.
And the two drugs you just mentioned, one of those is like an alternative to an LSD compound, and the other one is MDMA, like an alternative to that compound.
Roughly, I always found 4-HOMET to be similar kind of to acid. People have told me that it's more closely related to shrooms. I haven't really got much experience with shrooms. And 5-MAPB, it's like if you took MDMA and you removed all the stimulating effects. So you're not really grinding your teeth, your heart rate isn't really going too high. Sometimes people take too much for that reason because they're waiting to feel something that's not coming. So it's actually much better to mix it with something a little bit energizing because otherwise it can be hard to notice it. But as soon as you throw a bit of caffeine or some psychedelics in there, like it's really and it's more of a sort of soft, warm kind of blanket feeling than MDMA. It's not quite so, because MDMA can be quite intense and it feels very much like you're on a drug. 5-MAPB feels a bit more relaxed.
So to balance out the best physical sensation you've ever experienced, is there a peak or a standout moment of anxiety that you can pinpoint that you've had on a certain drug or combination of drugs, and how did you manage to get through that?
That acid trip was one, and that took me about a year of just constantly thinking about it. And I think it was a positive thing. I think it was a journey. I was like, I don't know, I do get a bit like, I feel like, for example, I was supposed to have that experience and all that. So I feel good about it now. I'm glad it happened. But for about a year, I was very unhappy afterwards. Or whenever I did feel happy, this thought would come and I'd immediately be like, no, don't feel happy because remember that trip. And I'd be like, oh shit, yeah. And that was really tough. But I think with enough thinking, and sometimes I think these things are meant to happen and you can get through them. I had also on ayahuasca,
did that feel like a constant, I wanted to ask you, did the year of getting through the LSD trip, did that feel like you were in a perpetual state of anxiety, or do you mean more like anxious moments would pop up during that year that the LSD trip reminded you of?
It was like I'd be feeling good and I'd be like, oh yeah, life's quite good at the moment. And I'd be like, remember what you saw. And I'd be like, oh shit, yeah, that's really dark. And now everything is colored by that. So it wouldn't matter what I experienced in my day-to-day life.
What did you actually,
inside the container.
What did you actually see? Are you able to describe the thing that you saw?
Not so visually, literally, but like was able to perceive very quickly and suddenly these ideas I was talking about earlier about infinity and about it made everything feel not only pointless but also it was like a thinking of a new concept of God as God being everyone and God being universal consciousness. The universe is consciousness, and then thinking of that consciousness experiencing a level of existential dread that there isn't a word for. Like there isn't a word to convey the feeling of how bad that thought is. This the total infinite empty loneliness of the universe was like so disturbing. I just, and you can't share it with anyone and no one understand, and you're just like, what do you do with that thought, man? There's no escaping it. It felt like there was no escaping it for me. So it was more that, just being able to rapidly perceive that. And probably the worst feeling in a more conventional sense on ayahuasca, one of the trips I took way too much because I thought it wasn't working, and it was working. I just hadn't waited long enough. I was being impatient and I took more, and then I thought it's still not working. And I kept thinking, we're only doing, it's a 2-week period, we're doing 5 sessions. I have to get the most out of it. And I ended up taking 3 doses. I took
Holy
a
shit.
monster dose. I don't remember how much it was, but it was like triple what I had on other days, basically. Like, it was a really, really fucking stupid amount. And I went into... Initially, there was a visual component. I don't get strong visuals on anything, really, but there were colors and things representative of the emotions and thoughts I was experiencing that would flash into my mind. And it was just this... It was animalistic at first. I was just lying on a bed, hyperventilating, and it was like if you gave a dog psychedelics, it would have a fucking bad trip, but it wouldn't be able to tell you what was going on. You know, it would just be just like, no. It was just fucking horrible. And these colors would flash into my mind, and they were kind of in sync with my hyperventilating, and people were trying to chill me out. And I was just like, it was like some exorcist shit. I was like, you know, rising up from the bed and shit from how heavily I was breathing. And it just felt so terrible. And it felt like that kind of wiped my brain. It was like, it was so bad. It felt like it wiped everything. And then I felt basically I'd become vegetative afterwards. And for a really long time, I couldn't move or speak. And it wasn't physical. I think I was so cowed psychologically by that experience that I was laying in this bed and I didn't have the courage. It was like I couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't move my hands because it was so intense, the fear. And it was like I had this tiny little grain of awareness right in the back of my mind, but everything around it was just gobbledygook. It was like, my brain had turned into this like psychedelic soup. And there was this tiny bit of me that was my soul trapped in this person that was now completely useless and broken. And that feeling as well, it was like, man, like made me realize to lose yourself, to lose the capacities of your mind is like the worst thing that could ever happen, to be like brain damaged or something. And I could remember stuff more or less, you know, and I remembered who my parents were. And I just kept thinking, my parents are going to have to come and get me, and they're going to be looking at me, and I'm not going to be able to speak or move, and they're going to be looking into my eyes, and I'm going to see their pain, and they're not going to be able to help me, and I'm not going to be able to help them, and they're going to have to get me and take me home like this. And that part of it is giving me... I get very sad when I see like that boy Otto, who went to North Korea and they sent him back, they tortured him and sent him back brain damaged and stuff. And whenever I see stuff like that, I find it hard to watch, because I know a little bit in some way what that feels like, where probably he looked to his parents and he knew who they were, but he couldn't be Otto. He was like, he was broken. And I can't believe they got away with that, to be honest. But over a period of about 12 hours, it just slowly faded, I guess. I thought, this is it. This is what I'm like forever, and I just better just get comfortable being like this and being pretty much paralyzed. And it just slowly faded. And then eventually I got up and I was like, oh, I can go for a piss now. I guess I'm not physically broken. And then eventually I fell asleep, and I woke up the next day and I was like, I'm never doing that again. And then they were like, let's just talk for like 2 minutes. We want to convince you to do it again. And I was like, all right, but I'm not going to do it. And literally within about 30 seconds, they'd convinced me. They were like, you went through that, the worst trauma ever, and today you're fine. You're smiling and laughing. And I thought at that point, I was like, that's fair enough. Because normally if you experience that level of trauma, you're fucking gone. And I was completely normal the next morning, which defies any understanding of anything really, you know, about how your brain, even the cortisol spike should just make you depressed the next day. I was fine.
Where was this ceremony?
In Brazil.
Okay.
In a not in a super traditional setting. It was a little bit traditional, but not typically traditional. It was in a house.
Yeah, that the fear of being brain damaged permanently is such an intense fear that for me is beyond even death. Because if I think back to my own drug-related anxieties, number 2 is definitely thinking that I'm dying. Like my heart's gonna beat so fast that it's going to fucking explode and, you know, feeling like my body's shutting down and this is it. But even more so is getting to a point where I'm like, holy fuck, I'm going to be stuck this way forever. And I can't put two words together right now. And just having to see people and, you know, not even being able to explain to them why my brain is now, you know, like a clusterfuck of mush is even more paralyzing than just dying, because at least then I would be released from all of it. But having to live through a state where I'm just like having people look at me and try to talk to me, and I have to have someone tell that person for me that, yeah, he took like smoked too much weed or took too much ayahuasca and now like he is like this forever. That was more terrifying to me than just dying and having that end.
It shouldn't be possible, should it? It's so frightening. You feel it shouldn't. I see it with people who've had accidents, and I guess people who have family members with dementia, they go through that, and it's fucking awful, man. Yeah.
What's something meaningful you've learned that would have been impossible to learn without taking drugs?
Oh, that's a really good question. Do you mind if I think on it while I go for a piss real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll join. I'll join you.
That's a good piss.
Right on.
Yeah, there's two things, I guess. Yeah, we've both been consuming far too many fluids today, it seems.
Oh yeah.
I already knew that, and for some reason I've sat here sipping from this the whole interview as well.
It goes back to that oral fixation of sipping on something during a podcast. It just doesn't feel right to do it without something.
Yeah, you're like, oh, you keep having little breaks to find. Yeah, I keep doing it. Yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, so one, I guess, is a more personal. Like, you don't. It just that you can know people and they can like really surprise you, and that's a thing that's come up time and again on various drugs, where like it's this really surreal, uncanny experience you can have with people where they tell you something you didn't know about them, and you're like, whoa, and it's like, it's really interesting because it's like they've just peeled back a layer of themselves, and you're seeing it's the same person, but you see them in a totally different light, and it's really, I guess it's kind of beautiful. It's certainly profound. It's like, wow, I had absolutely no idea you felt that way. You know, a person you know well, or maybe you don't know them that well, whoever it is, it could be a person you know really well, and they can just really surprise you, basically. Like, you can think that you know someone, but there are parts of themselves that people can keep quite hidden, and when you actually are exposed to that, it can be really powerful, and it makes you realize that most people are not really as they seem. Like, that's not all of them. If you take people at face value, you're missing out on the fact that there's probably a hell of a lot that you don't know about them. Most people, I mean, some people are just fucking boring. Like, some people you take drugs with them and you're like, wow, oh yeah, you're pretty much as I thought you were, but some people, yeah, they really, they can really like blow your mind in that way. And the other thing, which I guess is similar in a way, but the thing when I had a more positive ayahuasca experience, I realized is that everything around you, everything, whether it's in your mind or in the world, there's information in everything. And normally we can't really access this information. Like, we're not in tune with it. And we're not in tune with the sort of infinite learning that is possible when you're fully open. And I experienced this complete openness on ayahuasca once, and it made me realize, like, I remember looking at like water dripping from a leaf, and I was absorbing information I couldn't comprehend. And then when I would have a thought about that, every thought I had, I was learning from the previous thought, and I was like, I had that thought because I'm like this, and the reason I'm like this is because I think of things like this, and the reason I'm even having this is because I'm looking at this, and this is, and it was like, it was just like the same world that you always see, a bit like how, with a person, it's the same person you always see,
yeah,
and you think that you're seeing everything, and you're fucking not, man. Like you're seeing, it's like even though you can see clearly and you're from your eyes, your actual vision, your actual perception, it's like there's like fucking 10 foggy layers of glass in front of it. And for a moment I could like see everything, and I realized that if you're in tune in the right way and you're open in the right way, like any experience, anything that you perceive, any moment, every second has this like potential to it that is huge. And I can't access that easily now, but it's like we were talking about earlier, you know, it makes you realize, okay, like it's very much worth thinking a lot, and it's very much worth digesting things mentally and taking them in and trying to extract value and positivity from like anything and everything, because it is there. It's us that limits it. It's not, it is there.
Yeah. I've never done ayahuasca, so I don't know if this is in line with what you experienced, but there's this cue that I've learned through meditation where you look for the one who's looking. And when I do that and my mind is empty, I'm not distracted, and you're essentially looking for yourself. You're looking for the center, because you always feel like you're witnessing life from up here, like your consciousness is somehow between your eyes, like in this sphere, and you're looking down at things and you're looking up at things. But when you look for the one who's looking, and I've done that and I truly sit with it, it's almost like I'm removing the limitation of my perception. And instead of me looking at a kettlebell from up here, I'm just looking at like things in my apartment. I'll look for myself, and then I can get into this very like it's just a glimmer, and it may only last for a few seconds, but this feeling that I am of everything, and I'm not doing things to the world, or I'm not seeing something. I am of it. And I've had those glimpses during meditation. So I don't know if that's kind of a similar thing with ayahuasca, where you're like connected to the information, or you're removing the limitation of your own perception. But that cue, for whatever reason, has given me a glimpse towards that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I was even doing it while you're describing it just then. It's a weird exercise, isn't it?
Yeah. Look for the one who's looking.
Phrasing that way. Look for the one who's looking.
Look for the one. Yeah, it's the app is called Waking Up by Sam Harris. I don't know if you've ever used that meditation app, but he often uses that cue in daily meditations. You know, look for the one who's looking. Another one is look into the darkness in your eyes, like you're looking at a sunset. So try to imagine that the world isn't opening just because you open your eyes, but you can look at a sunset. You can look at the darkness in your eyes the same way you'd look out at the horizon, and kind of just like imagine you're doing that. Like a lot of these things that kind of get you out of your own perception, that like you need to be controlling it, and it's just there all the time.
So look for the one who's looking. The idea is that you see your sort of fake self, and then you step outside of it and you realize that it's not.
Yeah, like
a limitation. What's?
Yeah, so there's an episode where he explains the whole thing step by step. From what I experience it as is, when I look for the one who's looking, I'm looking for the place where I feel my consciousness exists. So a lot of the times I'm looking like almost inwards, like I'm looking at a light, but I'm like looking inwards towards the feeling, towards where I feel my consciousness resides. So it's like if you point it at yourself, you're looking for the spot that you feel like you're pointing at. Like I'm pointing at myself. And when we point at ourselves, we don't point to our foot. We point at that space in between our eyes, because of our senses, we feel that that's where consciousness resides. And so if you look for that spot, and I've looked for that spot, and I have this experience that it's not actually there, and I feel like emptied out. Like I don't actually find it. I feel like by not finding it, I've found the place. And that probably doesn't make sense at all. But it's like you almost blow away your perception of your perception. And that makes me feel more connected. And often that lasts for, maybe 30 seconds sometimes, but like just a few seconds of kind of just like sitting in that before the next thought pops into my head. But I would imagine that when people take psychedelics, maybe they're able to sit in that for longer periods where it's kind of just blown away without having to, you like the drug almost interacts and does it for you rather than having to sit in deep meditation. But I hope I'm explaining it in a way that makes sense, that you're looking for the place where you feel your consciousness resides. And then upon discovering that it's not actually there and it's actually empty, in a way makes you feel like you're connected because you're not doing things to other things. You're just a part of everything around you.
Mm-hmm. I think you're explaining it as clearly as is possible to explain it without experiencing it. Right?
Sam Harris definitely explains it much more eloquently than me. So if people are listening to this and they're interested in it, definitely go check out the Waking Up app. It's go through the lessons and stuff like that. It's my daily go-to in the morning. But yeah, that's looking for the one who's looking. When you were talking about that perception limitation on ayahuasca, it reminded me of that. So one question I wanted to ask you as we end off. So you came out with the Failed Artist Guide to an Unsuccessful Career, which is great. And it's available on your website, which I'll link the YouTube pages and website, Spotify, to this conversation, so people listening to this conversation could go check out the Failed Artist Guide. And in this guide, you write that there really are no rules, only guidelines. Rules tell you what you have to do. Guidelines show you what you can do if you want to. For you, what's a rule that you once thought that you had to follow that you no longer follow now, that you realize is just a guideline?
For me, there never was one. Part of the reason I wrote that is because the title of the book, I guess, is based around the fact that I haven't achieved like the success I wanted to in terms of like recognition and stuff, and I haven't. I've failed in that regard, I think, thus far, in terms of especially some of the social and kind of networking and political aspects of it, and marketing and stuff. I've really not mastered, but the artistry side for me has always been so easy. And I know that's subjective, right? Because for, every person who thinks my shit is like amazing, there's like a handful of people who think it's fucking awful. So I understand that's subjective, but for the thing is that I've always been very happy with my own creativity, and other people, I was always surprised, seem to kind of have the opposite problem. Like they had all these creative barriers and they wanted to make things but they couldn't and stuff. So I tried to write the things I've kind of always innately felt that have enabled me to very easily make the things that I want to make, because I never had issues in that regard. So for me, I just was always like, I was never constrained by genre or what I should do or shouldn't do or whatever else. Nothing from the external world ever affected, really, for the most part, what I was doing, other than in minor ways. But what I have realized recently is that my own thoughts have been like a prison in a way. And I very recently, I decided, I think I saw turning 30 as a kind of, I thought turning 30 is a good symbolic opportunity to like change a lot of things. And I realized a lot of the ways I was approaching things were very flawed and were sucking the joy out of it, and were turning, my own thoughts were like a prison, like, and it's hard to put into words, but I got to a point recently where I realized like I don't have to do things in a certain way, and I don't now have to keep trying to control things too much, I guess, instead of just like Like I would always think I should be making albums and I should be doing this in this way and I should be releasing this kind of thing, and it's going to, you know, people should like this and people should, and not focusing on what works or what felt good or what felt right or what was offering value to other people, but just focusing on a rigid idea of how I should approach all of this. And lately I was just thought, well, it's not working, and I feel I've done enough now that I've like answered this like calling or whatever it is, and like I don't have to there's a certain debt I don't feel I owe it quite as much anymore, and I can now just try and I guess I thought, well, the external stuff that I'm hoping for might never come, the recognition or whatever might never come, and even if it does, it might not be what it's cracked up to be, and I might not like it. So I should really just enjoy and fully exercise the part of me that is very capable of like creating things, and just like not waste that opportunity, not piss that away on trying to have my cake and eat it too, or trying to do everything in the perfect way, or trying to make everything exactly the way I feel it should be. But instead, I just, in a more general sense, even outside of creativity, I realized a lot of my thoughts were quite limiting. Like I was quite negative and quite saying, I'm quite good at saying why something is bad, or why kind of, it's so hard to describe because it's still quite new for me. But I just found a new kind of level of freedom in my thoughts in general, and a new freedom in my actions as a result that has changed everything for me recently. And some of that was like just thinking in a more simple way, in a more grounded, like mature way, I guess, thinking like, okay, well, people really like some of the music videos I've done. I could keep trying to force people to enjoy singles that don't have videos. I could keep putting stuff out that I want people to like and that I think they should like and that I think deserves respect and recognition. Or I could just kind of do that for myself. And when it comes to YouTube, for example, just only really put stuff out when I feel 100% right about it. I feel like it's really good. I feel like people will like it. I feel it's the right thing to do. I just take it in a more calm, measured way and think like, this, I don't know how to describe it. I'm still, like I said, I'm still kind of trying to figure out what this realization was, but just being a bit more chilled out really, and letting go a bit and being like, just express yourself and don't put too fine of a point on it and don't get controlling over it, and just enjoy the freedom of being able to do that and enjoy the feeling of it. And if you're not enjoying the feeling of it, probably other people aren't enjoying consuming it. And so you have to be able to do it in a way that is cathartic and enjoyable. Otherwise it will just become, I don't know, people won't enjoy it. And so far, it's been a very short time, but so far it's been very successful and productive. And I'm trying to do things. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it sounds like doing things forcefully versus flowing with intuition to release things when it feels right to put it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being like water, as they say.
Be like, yeah, the Bruce Lee way of creativity, way of life. Well, thank you so much, Ciaran, for coming on the show. Can you please tell people where they can go check out your music, your solo podcasts, the Failed Artist Guide, all that. And I'm also going to link it to wherever people are listening to this and watching this as well. So if any part of this conversation has interested you and you're listening to this, please go check out Ciaran's links. And I'm sure you will be able to continue your fascination through those outlets.
Oh, thanks so much, man. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me as well. It's been a blast. It's whizzed by.
Yeah, it has. Yeah,
really
I looked down at like an hour and 38 minutes or something like that, and it's almost 3. So it's been it's always a sign of that you're enjoying it. So I'm sure other people will enjoy this as well.
That's mad, man. 3 hours, Jesus. Yeah, Oloff is the main thing I'm doing. Well, the two main things are that and my podcast. So Oloff, you can search OLOFF on YouTube. Avoid you'll have to scroll past the snowman from Frozen, who, even though our names are spelled differently, he's beating me on the SEO front somehow. And just, I don't know, like, I feel the shit I'm putting out lately is, for me, is the stuff I feel really good about. My latest few videos in there, worth checking out. And that's my main thing. I guess secondary to that is a podcast I do with my ex. It's called Cheek Clappers. It's a
cheek
kind
clappers?
of a comedy podcast.
Like butt cheeks? Nice.
Yeah, like clapping cheeks. Yeah. It's open to interpretation as well. We don't say what kind of cheeks. And that is a comedy podcast that if you don't like kind of tasteless or crass or offensive, maybe even sometimes borderline hateful comedy, then probably it's not for you. But we sort of see it as a place to just basically say anything, really. And and to sort of we've dealt with a lot of our personal issues on there. We had a lot of fights on air. We get into a lot of wild shit. We've really shown people the best and the worst of ourselves on that show, and we're both convinced it's like one of the best things ever made. We love it, and the listenership for that is growing now. We're working on doing it more so. So those are the two main things. It's kind of I guess as well, it's kind of a story as well, Cheek Clubbers. It has like a narrative, but it's also like, and then BigDome, the YouTube videos, I guess that's like the third thing.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check out Cheek Clappers. It's about probably 70% of the podcasts I listen to are comedy podcasts and like Theo Vaughn, Tim Dillon, stuff like that. So I'll definitely go check that out. And
I must say, with sorry to cut you off, Cheek Clubbers, the first, we actually have a disclaimer about the beginning. The first 10 or so are fucking awful. Really, we've gotten really good. So I worry sometimes people will listen to the early Cheek Clappers and think, Jesus, these guys are horrible. And we kind of were, and it was a bad vibe between it, and it was all, but it's grown into something we're both really proud of. And more recently, I think we've gotten to another level, really. But it's kind of a whole progression. But
yeah, that's how it goes. I definitely don't. If I'm going to recommend my own show to people, I'll tell people to check out the latest episode. Go to the first 5 or 10 episodes, and it's just tragic, baffling for words, and gasping for air in conversation. It's I guess that's how it goes. That's how anything goes. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show. As on cue, the construction literally just started. So I'm glad that we figured out how to get around this. And, for people listening, we rescheduled this a couple times to get around the construction. So we managed to do it. And I can stop the conversation and tell these guys to fuck off now. They didn't ruin the plan.
Nice, yeah.
Even though they have nothing to do with it.
I'm glad, man. That's really good. I'm really grateful we were able to find a way to do it. It was great.